guys ready to start? Carol? Yes. Okay, I'm going to call the policy committee meeting to order. We're going to start with just brief introductions, and then I'll just walk through the agenda really quick. Mary, do you want to start? We'll just do the dais.
Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel. Liz Large, Contracted Senior Legal Advisor. Michelle DePass, Board Member.
Julia Brim-Edwards, Committee Chair, Board Member.
JJ Kunsevi, Student Representative.
Patty Sullivan, Board Member and Committee Person.
Eddie Wong, Board Member.
Okay, so after almost 6 months of work with a little bit of time off this summer, tomorrow night we're having the first reading or the introduction of the cell phone policy. And we're going to do two things today. We want to provide one last opportunity for some public comment before the first reading. Knowing also that in our 21-day comment period, we do have another significant school break that's during that time period. So this is an opportunity for any public comment. It may be a shorter meeting, depending on how many people we have signed up. In addition, I thought we'd start the committee meeting with one particular item that may be relevant for people who are going to be testifying today. So we posted online is the draft version of the policy that was recommended from the policy committee for a first reading. And it includes the core elements that were designed by the committee in consultation with staff input, student input, board member input, and so that's the draft policy that we're going to be considering. It's relatively short and high level. We'd expect there'd be administrative guidance that would follow after the board policy is introduced. Director Wong has indicated that he's going to offer an amendment tomorrow, which would be, as a non-committee member, that's a totally fine way to do it, and we talked about it this morning. That amendment is posted also online, both with this committee's materials, but also the board meeting materials for tomorrow night. And I thought I'd just ask Director Wong to briefly sort of summarize what the amendment does and why you're proposing it, and then we'll move right to public comment.
Great. Thank you, Chairman members. So the amendment I want to propose tomorrow is basically the same as the current proposal, the draft proposal for the cell phone policy, except I am deleting 2A and the title for 2B. And what that effectively does is that instead of separate rules for high school and middle school, it's one rule for the entire district, which is basically that personal electronic devices must be off and away throughout the school day. And that way, it's not an exception for high school. The reason for this is because I want to provide an alternative because, having been to all the policy committee meetings or at least watched them, there's been quite a good discussion about whether lunch should be included or not in terms of off and away. And then also so proposing this gives an alternative. At the same time, having talked to a number of principals, both principals that are in schools that have off and away all day policies and schools that don't, the big theme that we encounter is that, currently there's a lot of schools that have basically what is effectively the same policy as the one that is originally proposed, which is allows during lunch and maybe passing time. And those schools are having trouble. And the schools that have moved to off and away all day, and the principals I talked to have said, their policy was basically the same as this current draft, which is, allowed during lunch or passing time. And that hasn't worked. And so I'm afraid that the reason I want to propose this amendment is because if we propose this current amendment, it's kind of just reinforcing the status quo, which is basically a lot of high schools are seeing trouble with that, with this kind of rule, with especially during lunch and passing time. And there's quite a bit of data to support this as well in terms of districts that have banned phones throughout the whole day have seen huge increases in student achievement. We're talking about in some areas alone, 7% overall in test scores among students, and 14% among the lowest performing students in terms of increase in test scores. So, and it seems like through all the kind of research, the data that we have so far, allowing it during lunch or passing time seems like there's already growing evidence supporting the fact that that is enough to kind of derail a lot of these achievements that could have happened if it was all day. And so that's why, again, this is something that I'm pretty want to offer this alternative because I feel like this is the version that has seen the most success out there in the world. And from someone who has taught, and I say luckily in very capital letters, before cell phones have been in place or were a thing, and after cell phones were a thing, it is a huge night and day difference. And one of the things I want to also rephrase the way we present this is that we're not trying to restrict, we're trying to give back something that was taken away already. For example, like in my high school experience, half of my memories of high school were from lunch. Right, the banter, the stupid stuff that happened, right? And when I taught before, when I was teaching before cell phones were a thing, those kind of things were happening during lunch. You know, kids were laughing, or socializing, or doing stupid things, which is, you know, what forms memories. And when cell phones became a thing, that all went away, and it is depressing to watch. And so, even on a personal level, there's a lot of arguments for doing the entire day, restricting electronics for the entire day. And not only that, the fact of the matter is that after COVID, things just have gotten worse. Cell phone use, screens, on-screen time, kids addictions to devices, adults addiction to devices. Everybody, things have just gotten a lot worse, and it's a lot harder environment out there to teach. And I think this is the kind of the minimum that we can do is to support our teachers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for offering that. Just a suggestion for tomorrow night, since it's coming somewhat late and we'll be voting on it, is to maybe send around and get posted some of the data that you have.
I was going to say, Director Wong has shared some data as of, I believe, last Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday, kind of compilation of data. But I also wanted to add
I thought it was news stories.
it was, yes, it was. But I think it's instructive. I think it'd be, helpful to read. But I also want to add, just for my own observation, and you say this is going late. I thought we were under the impression that the policy committee itself, not all of us, most of us, didn't want a lunchtime exception. But that's what was presented. But I also want to share what I observed when walking through Benson High School. I observed students kind of getting caught with their phones in their hands during passing period. And what was very compelling was a group of African American students that were lingering well after the bell, and those are the students that we want to raise achievement scores for. I also heard from my tour guide that at Grant School, where they have Yalter pouches, the students are getting an additional 10 minutes of instructional time per period, and that was compelling for me. If we say we want to raise scores, then we need to do everything in our power to do that, including reading through the data that shows the increase in achievement. Significant increases, 7% for high-performing students and 14% for lower-performing.
Yeah, so it would be useful to see the actual study of that. if we're gonna use it as a, again.
Or we could just ask our principals that have the younger pouches. I mean, it's anecdotal. We don't have proof.
I'm sorry, I thought you just said that there were districts that had increased it by 7 to 14%.
Yes, there is a study out there that shows that increase.
Okay, I'm just saying we should have access to that. We should post it if it's gonna be,
So the compilation that I share with the entire board, the study that I'm quoting is the first thing on there. It also quotes multiple other studies from other areas as well. There are also a list of articles, and embedded in the articles that are listed, and the reason I included those articles is because they do reference the studies, and there are links inside the articles to those studies that I'm referring to as well.
and I'm curious, the districts that have those, do they have open campuses
Yes.
for lunchtime?
Yeah.
Okay,
When I looked
great.
into it, yes. I also, oh yeah, one other thing, I did talk with the principal of Cleveland today, which also has an open campus. You know, as I was there, riding by, there's multiple students out for lunch, and no one had phones. So, and as you know, Cleveland is using the Yonder pouches this year.
Yeah.
Just a question, are you suggesting that the district would require all the schools to have Yonder pouches?
No.
Okay.
I would just like to comment that of all the emails I've received, nothing has said, from teachers, have said, we don't want restrictions. They really want restrictions. They want to teach. And that's how we're going to get our scores up, is to have teachers be able to teach.
Right, which is why the policy has off and away during class time.
But it's really been hard to do.
So
at class.
yes, at the beginning of the year, people were coming to the idea that, there were phones that were not used during instruction time. And now that we're into the fall, that has completely slipped at every school I spoke with. It's gotten very lax. And it's getting harder for, faculty and educators. It's not their core mission to kind of police that. It does detract
if we have
from
a
the learning
district-wide,
experience for our students.
if we have a district-wide policy, they're still going to have to enforce. I mean,
Yes, and at some point it'll hopefully become easier to enforce once it's expected and standardized. Labor economics, there's a study, technology distraction, and student performance.
And one of the interesting things that in the talk with the principal at Cleveland was that she mentioned that only about maybe 50% of the students are actually using the Yonder pouches. Most of them are either just keeping it away, turned off, or left at home. And part of that reason is because there's now a culture of not having it. And that was a big drastic change that they've seen there.
Well, I'm relying on my email correspondence, who seems to say things way better than I do. But one person said the policy, as it is now, just off during the school day, seems to be a compromise, not day, just during class, seems to be a compromise between those who want a strong screen policy and those who want minimal restrictions. But not all compromises are good ones. This policy is missing most of the benefits of a strong screen policy, in parentheses, significant distance between screen and student being necessary to achieve these, while having the drawbacks of both a strong screen policy, students feel they should be able to use their phones, and a weak screen policy, many students will still be on their phones.
just to clarify, the only thing Eddie's amendment's doing is just taking away phones at lunchtime. Just to be clear, because
Yeah.
making it sound like, I mean, that policy, like, it's not doing anything. It's actually the entire school day, with the exception, because I think you said passing time was okay, but the policy is not passing time. So it's, the only difference is just whether,
Well, the policy's all day, right? So that would be passing.
what I'm saying, Patty, is like currently the policy is the entire day with the exception of the student's designated lunch period
So passing time.
is included in the off and away.
Except it's not being followed.
We don't have a policy right now, so there's nothing to follow. Right?
Yes, and again, what I observed from and contrasted with an off and away all day policy and one that allows during passing times is you see phones out when students not going to class. And we also heard from principals that
What school is that happening? Is there school policy that they can use them during passing time? Because
there's
that might be why
Grant
they're.
that has a yonder pouch that's locked away all day.
But what school are students using during passing time? And that may be allowed by their policy. I'm just curious what school.
So the school that I've observed is Benson High School, and they have a off and away policy that's enforced at the class level.
But
and during passing times, the students are adolescents, and they're finding lots of ways around study groups in the hallway, using the bathroom. So
Well, I guess
it's like an addictive substance.
But my question was, is Benson's policy that you can't use it during passing time? Because if that's not their policy, then the students actually are following the policy. But if their policy is not during class time and not during passing time,
the policy that they have in place was followed a little bit more strictly in the beginning of the fall and is very lax right now.
But
So you're saying.
But what is the policy? Because if they're not getting yonder pouches, and it's the same. But I'm just saying.
They're allowed, right?
Right. It's like if they're currently allowed to use it during passing time, maybe that's why they're using it during passing time. Versus if the school policy is they can't use it during passing time.
That's very, very hard to enforce with a student body of 1,700 to 2,200 students.
But that's
you
what
add-
that's what we're.
Almost the entirety of the principals I talked to, including Principal Watkins at Cleveland today this morning, said that lunchtime was when they saw most of the issues around cell phones happening in terms of taking photos and using it inappropriately, bullying, video, and then spreading misinformation from embarrassing events that happen, like almost all those issues. And so the principal felt very strongly that during lunchtime was an important time to not have it. And this was reiterated throughout pretty much every principal I talked to. And I think the issue here, is I want to kind of back up a little bit because, when we start arguing about the minutiae about, like the minutes, like, oh, this minutes you can't. I think one of the problems that we're having right now is that the high schools are allowed to set their own policy. And because of that, right now it's kind of like at risk of over-exaggerating a little bit. It's a little bit like the Wild West out there. Everyone kind of sets their own thing, and then you have issues of implementation or lack of support, and everyone does their own thing, and it becomes kind of a little chaotic in terms of implementation support. So when we have a rule that's universal throughout the whole thing, the entire district, it can solve two problems. One is schools feeling like they're on their own to figure this out. Right now, we have district that is able to support and create a unified process, procedure, expectations, guidelines, so that we don't have like the scandals that were happening in Grant that we got tons of emails about, or and it's also the other thing is that when you have an expectation that's simple, unfortunately, I think human brains, especially in my years, it's not just for students, but for adults too. But the simpler the rule is, the easier it is to follow. So when you have exceptions throughout the day, and this is what I've also kind of observed is that when you have complicated rules, those edges where there's less restrictions, those boundaries get pushed. And kids, adults, humans are really good at pushing boundaries, and keep pushing those boundaries until it just goes back to the way it was before. That's kind of the story that we saw at Benson when we were there, where they had these pouches that had a very strict rule, and at first things were better than they were last year. This is again, I'm reiterating the story I heard from teachers. And then slowly it got worse and worse and worse as people were falling back on habits, finding places to hide. When we talked to campus security there, it's like, yeah, he knew these were places that the students knew the campus security routes and could figure out where the blind spots are in school and would congregate there during these set times. And so whenever you have something that has holes in it, those holes are going to get stretched. And I think the advantage of a unified policy, it's simple, a simple policy that just says, no phones all school day, is that it's simple, from bell start to bell end. And now we can figure out the best way to implement it. I'm not pushing yonder pouches. There may be, one of the things is that there's tons of billions of smart people out there who could probably figure out better systems to do it. And we need to be flexible enough so that we can always adapt the best practices. Today, it may be lock boxes, or it may be yonder, but tomorrow it may be AI robots that shoot tranquilizer darts in your neck if you find, I'm just kidding. But,
One of the other technical fixes we heard about was requiring a Wi-Fi password. So, it was mentioned as a potential technical fix, so educators...
You don't need a Wi-Fi password to use...
Well, they were talking about blacking out the school and having a password protected solution for
But
educators.
then when they leave campus at lunch,
Well, they don't have their phone at lunch, hopefully.
it's like a radio jammer type of device.
right, but
I don't understand the technology, but it makes sense when I heard it.
well, that makes sense if you're in the school, but we have all of our campuses are open. So the moment they leave campus, you wouldn't be jamming their phones.
But if it's a bell-to-bell policy, then they have their phones away all day.
Where is that?
Wherever we have yonder pouches.
But
Again, I don't
thought we
wanna-
weren't going to require young
don't-
patches.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's not productive because it's not for the board to just figure out the best implementation. That's for the schools, district, teacher, superintendent to figure out how to manage this. It's our role to set policy and guidelines so that in direction. And again, in the future, 5 years from now, people might figure out an even better way to do it.
I'm just suggesting, at the end of the day, the district staff here aren't going to be implementing. It's whatever the policy is going to need to be enforced at the school level. That's the reality. It's not going to be the superintendent. It's not going to be the lawyers or anybody else. It's still going to be district's school staff. So for whatever it is, I think we should recognize that. And yes, technology changes, but I do think it's worth thinking through how these get implemented, because when you mentioned hey, we had this policy, and that by the end, by 4 months in, nobody was following it. So I think it's okay, why is that? So asking
But that's
questions is
that would be a staff role to figure out. Unfortunately, that's a problem that they would need to solve. The administration at the building level versus our job as policy.
Well, one of the things, if the implementation has a financial cost, that is our job.
True.
And making trade-offs. So if we have a policy that can only be implemented because we're putting a cone or a blackout over the whole school, whatever the cost of that is, and that again, that's not lunchtime, or requiring the one mechanism that currently apparently exists, maybe the yonder pouches that has an expense, like that is part of the board's responsibility of how we use our resources.
It is, but we're trying to make the policies that's best for the kids, right? And then we got to figure out how to implement. But if we keep saying, oh, this might happen, that might happen, that might happen, we're not going to get a policy that works. I mean, this may not work, but at least we have a policy that we're working toward.
Right. And I will say, and I want to just go back to the very beginning, we started this, we decided to have a district-wide policy, so nobody should say this is the status quo, because it's not the status quo. Let's just be clear. The difference between the proposals is fairly small, and I would say, and we'll have the full board can consider it tomorrow. I would also say that we initially told students that there was going to be, we were going to ask them what they thought, and we weren't going to give them an option of something that we weren't going to, that we weren't willing to consider. And so we fed very clearly that it's not a choice of like, do we have a district-wide policy or not, right? And we didn't say, is it okay to have them on the class, on class time? Because we'd decide like, those are things kind of non-negotiables. But we were going to ask the students what they thought about about sort of the spectrum of things. And the students had a point of view. And so I think while we've talked about staff perspectives, we've talked about board perspectives, I also want to provide, and JJ, I don't know if you're comfortable, if you want during the public comment period to have some way for students to share their perspective, whether it's on the amendment or just the underlying policy, because I'm not sure everybody likes the underlying policy as it is, but I do think we also need to include students in the discussion. And again, it wasn't so much, I think everybody started with like, absolutely not in class time, and we need to have a district-wide policy. And from there, there's some variations, or people have different perspectives.
Yeah, and kind of adding on to what Chair Brim-Edwards said, we heard very clearly from students, they're totally fine with not having phones during class time, but when it comes to lunchtime, they want to be able to have phones, and some of the issues we brought up was, safety concerns. We know for our students, going out on some of these streets are really dangerous, and I really think it's important as a board, we really listen to our students, because when I talk to students, and when I ask them, what do they think about the board, they think the board doesn't represent them. They don't feel like they're heard or seen by the board, and it's important when our students are telling us things, we need to listen to them, and especially being able to negotiate with them on a simple thing like lunch would really be appreciated from our students.
Just to kind of reply for that, I think we heard from a lot of students, and I don't want to misrepresent because the students gave a lot of great input, and it wasn't just about the lunch issue. It was about a lot of other things about the implementation, about how things people have gotten around it, the issue of respect in terms of trying to enforce a policy or a practice. And I think there was quite a lot of really good input that we should be taking. And lunch is one of them. The thing about the safety issue, though, is that it's actually, there's actually statistics on this about using your cell phone when you're out and walking about in the city is actually more dangerous than people who don't have it. So I don't know. I think there's the desire, there's a lot of great input. Lunch is one of them, and I just want to reiterate. When I read through a lot of that, or when I looked at a lot of that, the feedback, lunch was one of the many issues. At the same time, there's also the desire, what you want versus the reason behind it. And I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect between the reasoning and the desire. So I just want to be clear that there was a lot of input, and I think we do need to continue to get student input in terms of how to implement this best so that students feel that it's done right, that it's done well. Yeah.
I want to add that we did get some parent input from Grant High School. They're also an important stakeholder group. survey when I'm looking for the number, but the 82% of, I believe, 168 responses. 82% believe grants yonder path policy has had a positive impact. 6% say no impact. 12% say it's had a negative impact. All 168 respondents are grant parents and caregivers, except for one whose student has already graduated. And so I think, we do hear from people, and we tend to hear from people that are loud and that can make meetings and know how to provide comment. And but we know that that's not everybody. And so I think there's a lot, we're trying to balance here. I think that since we know and the data shows that cell phones are addictive, I would expect that someone that's addicted to a thing wouldn't gladly give it up. And I've raised teenagers myself, and it's hard at the dinner table to get phones out of their hands to have a home-cooked meal. So it's anecdotal, but I want to just remind everyone that there are lots of stakeholders, and all of the input's important, and how we use that is important. There's lots of voices to be heard.
Is that disaggregated by any particular demographics, or just the people who responded to it?
So you're getting to look at confirmation bias, and no, it's not disaggregated by race, by income, by grade level. It's a pretty simple survey.
Okay. I think I'm going to move to, thank you for sharing your amendment. We're going to move to public comment. Go ahead, Ms. Bradshaw.
Okay. We have 2 people in person and 1 virtual, so I'll call the people in person first and then move to virtual. Carrie Zambrano, Jamie Humber. You can go ahead and come up to the...
How we doing? All right, so first off, let's just say that I agree that it needs to be an all-day ban. All right, but to start off with, I'm not going to give you my words. I'm going to give you the words of our head of security at Benson. My vision on cell phone ban has to do with safety. Here at Benson, I have witnessed fights that could have been prevented. Kids who were in the halls who wanted to jump another student. Then they saw that student, followed him, texted his friends to come out of their class. These students then jumped them, violently kicked, and punched them. It took 8 staff members to break up the fight. I also witnessed students camping out in bathrooms, texting other students to come to the bathroom. Then other students arrived, appeared to pass off money. In return, the students received marijuana vape device. This has happened a few times. Students also hide contraband in the bathrooms, then text others where they had hidden the items. Also, we are trying to keep students and staff safe by ensuring that all doors are secured and we monitor who's coming in and out of the building. When students are late from lunch, they text their friends to open the doors and they prop them open so they can get into the building. This creates a great safety issue for all who we are trying to keep safe. I would like to put a cell phone ban for the entire day. They have become a big security issue. So we need a cell phone ban.
I'm sorry, I should have done this at the very beginning. Can you just start by stating your name?
My name is J.T. Homburg.
Thank you.
We need a cell phone ban all day long. And I know that we have the lunch exception. But the bullying happens at lunch. You know, there are people taking pictures of other students and posting stuff, and just awful things like, look what the cow is eating today. I mean, sitting at the lunch table. So, we've had...
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Thank you. So, it's not hard. No cell phones, period. A simple rule across the board. We can have exceptions for IEPs, have exceptions for health, like blood sugar monitoring, that kind of stuff. But we shouldn't have cell phones at all. with it. No exceptions, no lunch, no, I'm going to teach my class and use cell phones. They should just be restricted. And personally, the yonder pouches are great. I visited Grant personally. I walked around that campus for an hour and a half. I looked really, really hard for cell phones. I didn't see one. And I'm one of the people that wrote the policy at Benson. And I can tell you, no, the policy is not working. Works in my classroom because I enforce it. But out in the halls, it doesn't work. And when I wrote it, I knew it wasn't going to work because it's almost impossible to enforce if students are sitting there with their cell phones in their back pocket, in their backpack, or wherever they can access them at any time. We can't enforce it, even though we try. We got 4 security guards at Benson. They cannot enforce the entire hallway. All I can cover is my classroom, and I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to enforce a cell phone policy in my classroom. I should have to teach. That should be my job.
Thank you for coming again and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
And if you could just start by saying your name, and then go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carrie Zambrano, and I'm here to share my perspective on off and away except for lunch. I teach at Benson Tech, and I'm a member of our cell phone committee. So I'm going to start with a quote of the PPS board draft first reading proposed policy. Peer and student-to-teacher interactions are fundamental to learning, and we must create the conditions that allow students to be engaged, focused, challenged, so they can reach their full potential. That's your verbiage, and then this is my response to that. The proposed district cell phone policy, as written in Section 2A, contradicts this commitment to change conditions and improve student lives and academic outcomes. Because students have access to phones during lunch, therefore it's permissible to have a phone at school in a backpack or bag during class, though it's required to be off and away. When a student has such access, they use their phone in the bathroom or hallway with little or no recourse by staff. Following off and away, except for lunch, guidelines as the board has described in 2A, the burden of enforcement when students do not follow the guidelines falls again upon the teacher and other staff who happen to be in the hallways, and it is ineffective. In such a scenario, all we can do is ask that they will put it away, and when we move on away from the student, they just take it out again. You might wonder how often this happens. Each time I walked in the hall today and every day, the majority of students had their phones out. In my classroom, off and away, but allowing accessible phones keeps teachers and staff in the middle, losing instructional time. This is me, cell phones away, earbuds out, the bell has rung, or the bell for lunch and passing has not rung. Please put your phone in this pouch. Yes, the bell has rung, but you didn't hear it because you were playing a game on your phone. These interactions create confrontation and frustration on both sides and degrade the student-to-teacher interactions that are so vital to learning. This atmosphere undermines the conditions that allow students to be engaged, focused, and challenged so they can reach their full potential. Thank you to the board members who visited schools to see hallway reality of off and away except for at lunch.
I'm wondering if it should say locked and away instead of off and away. What do you think, Eddie?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember the original, so in my
We just finished the,
Oh, yeah.
the public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then that's a,
Oh, right, we have another one, sorry.
We have Andy too, and they should be coming in virtually here. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
we can. Go ahead and introduce yourself with your name, and then go ahead and share your public comment.
Yes, hi. My name is Andy too. I am a senior at McDaniel High School.
Go ahead and provide your
okay.
public comment.
Okay, so I believe a lot of the phone pouches and just restricting it for the whole day is like really excessive. I believe like it's gone too far, and also it could be unsafe to like lock it. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if many of you heard this, but like I've kind of created a whole speech of like more than just the phone policy. Unfortunately, you clarified that we're only talking about the phone policy today, so I'm just only going to read those like paragraphs of my big speech.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead,
Yeah.
and you can always send us your whole speech by email if you want. But please address the cell phone piece.
Yeah, I also shared the Google Doc with JJ as well. He should also have it, but I can read it right here and right now. The new phone restrictions with the magnetic lock pouches for the inside of the school buildings have been very shocking to many students. Not only is this a poorly conceived plan, it can also be very dangerous. In case of emergency or post, we would need to contact families to let them know whether or not they're okay. Parents could be worried about their inability to contact their child to check and make sure they're okay, and if they're not, they should be. We should also be able to contact emergency services in case classroom phones or others in the building are out of service. Phones are more likely able to help us to literally just call for help at those times instead of giving ourselves away to criminals somehow. For some reason, students in other schools like Grant are saying yes with the phone ban, but me and my friends at McDaniel see the bigger picture. Yes, I saw that video on the K2 News YouTube channel, and I hope you also saw it as well. I'm also not afraid to call out Portland or its other news channel, Fox 12 Oregon / Good Day Oregon, who, with such a large number of viewers at home, should not make their opinion sound like a popular opinion or an exact fact. I agree that there's been a problem with students being distracted on their phones. However, implementing a phone ban district-wide is very excessive and punish all students for just a small fraction of students that are just irresponsible with the phones that actually deserve to get penalized. In McDaniel, most students are responsible enough to put their phones in their own bags, and we will still need our devices for educational purposes, such as researching and scanning QR codes. There's also students that would want to listen to music to help them focus for their work. Some students really need that, especially if they have ADHD, like my friend Julius, again, same person, who made a rant video that supported me. In my opinion, it should be clear that we should be sticking to the old style of teachers putting their phones in like the phone boxes or like phone jails. That way it's not too secure that we can take them out quickly during an urgent situation. Instead of even thinking to spending part of the school budget on these magnetic pouches. Students who refuse to comply can get punished and penalized and meet with the deans or principals. You just said we are facing budget cuts, and yet the pouches are what we're spending our part of our budget on. There's going to be money towards them, and like instead of putting it into better teaching tools and supplies, as well as improving the classroom environment. So, yeah.
Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
And we'll also get from JJ the rest of the speech.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to respond also. I think.
I'm sorry, can we just make sure that we've had all the public comment?
Yes, that is everybody who signed up.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
I think we do take student input very seriously, and I think one of the things that has been highlighted in terms of the worry about an all-day ban is that safety component. Now, there's two separate things, right? There's one is allowed during lunch, and one is safety when you're off campus, right? And so, taking student input would try to figure out, we don't want to implement, the district should take this feedback back and not implement a system that would completely block access to any phone. Like, for example, just interestingly, when I was talking this morning with the principal at Cleveland again, but also this is the same thing that all the principals and teachers at places that are using pouches have said, is that the pouches are just a neoprene bag. So in case of emergency, you can break it open and access your phone. And that was important to them because when they have an open campus and there's something that happened off campus where they do need contact, they can easily just rip open the pouches and get at their phone. So I'm not trying to say the pouches are the answer, but one way to take in the student feedback, thank you for the public comment, is the concern about safety. And one way to implement that is to make sure that we don't implement a system where your phones are inaccessible when you're off campus. And I think that is an important thing. The policy that we're debating right now, yes or no during lunch, I feel is also a separate issue, right? Because the implementation of it depends on how the schools in the district want to do it. And that needs to have student input. From a policy perspective, the policy is just a direction. And so I just want to kind of acknowledge that your concerns are heard, and we should be paying attention to make sure that we don't implement any system that would put any student in danger. Thank you.
We said we aren't going to talk about how it gets implemented, but I guess the only scenario where I'd see that student safety is addressed is if you bought the Yonder pouches, because all the other solutions are not ones where you're carrying something around that you can rip open. So I mean that example of you could still be safe if you're downtown Portland or you're at Lloyd Center or whatever it is that you're doing off campus. I mean, I never stayed on campus, and my kids didn't either when they were in high school.
You had cell phones when you were a kid.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, just saying. You left campus.
You survived, so. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. My bad.
I was saying, most of our kids leave campus, and you do have. I mean, my kids. I think generally students do, and the solution. That the example you just gave, like they'd be okay but that relies on having a Yonder pouch, and I do think again, it's a budgetary decision. So, say for example, I also don't think we want to. I don't think we want to have a policy that we don't try and enforce. So to say, well, it's in a direction, but maybe we won't enforce it or enforce that piece of it. I don't think that's how we want to start out. But again, I think it's just a policy call of I don't think there's any disagreement of for the vast majority of the day. I think the board has been pretty clear, and we will have a discussion about what to have to do about lunch, because that seems to be the last piece. And Director Sullivan, you wanted to raise the issue of locked. I guess I'm not understanding what locked means versus off.
So, yeah.
Well, it would be in either a lock box or a pouch. If it's because it sounds to me like you're saying having them off and away is useless, because it's in a pocket and it's in a backpack. It's still buzzing. It's still causing problems. So off and away is useless.
So, for example, you have a lockbox. They go to their first period class. Their phone gets locked there, and then at the end of the day, they go back to their.
Yeah, in junior high, middle school, that would be fine. I think it's very hard in high school. That's what Lincoln has, and they're having the same problem at breaks and lunch. Kids have all.
But I guess I'm
have it
just
all
trying
the
to
time.
understand if you're saying.
So they have to move it. They have to go to another class, put it in another lockbox. That's still better than having it ring in your backpack.
I guess
That's
I'm
not
trying
great.
to understand, but if you were saying locked away and all day, they just go someplace in the morning, lock their phone there, they don't need to, and then at the end of the day, they'd go back and get it?
That would be ideal in my perspective. and it
Yeah,
would
we have
work
like a
fine.
big locker
I think.
room. I mean,
I
that
think-
just.
Yeah, I
social
mean,
media.
maybe their first period class.
So Director Sullivan, to help with that issue, because I was thinking about that too. So if you remember from the original one, so in my amendment, I crossed off the entire 2A, which is the high school specific one, except for one sentence that says, so that the devices cannot disrupt students or the learning environment. And this is the one that, thank you, Director Brimowers, that I suggested be put into language. And it was.
I'm
and so
surprised
I
you're
did-
deleting your own amendment.
No, I deleted 2A, but then I copy and pasted that into B. And so right now it says personal electronic devices must be off and away throughout the high school. And then I added that part back in so that the device cannot disrupt students or their learning environment. So that is a standard. So if it's in your backpack and it is put it away in a way that can disrupt the student mentally, you can interpret it however you want. So in this way, you can be as strict as you want. So if it's ringing and it's disrupting your concentration, that's disruption. And that can't be allowed. So that the reason I put that sentence in there is so that it allows as much enforcement as you need to make this work, if that makes sense.
And if it were off,
Because
it
the
would be
worry about
buzzing or.
yeah, exactly. So if it's buzzing all day, that's disruption, disrupting a learning environment. The issue I have with the word locked is that, again, 3 years from now, someone might discover a better system, right? If some pouch companies are making tons of money right now, you can bet in the free market, people are trying to figure out better ways to do this, and it's a big market for it. So and having any specific language that says how to do it would be worrisome because then it may bar us from a better method in the future, if that makes sense. And that's the reason why I was adamant about putting so that the device cannot disrupt students.
And in the research, some of the research I've read says it's disrupting them just by having it close because they're waiting that something might come in a minute. And it's scary to me, and I think we're giving the students something by taking them away. I know they don't see it that way, but we're the adults in the room, and I think we have to be strong and maybe not liked. And I'm comfortable with that.
I think that what gets me is if we have the ability to raise student achievement for the kids that we don't serve well, we should do that. We can't keep saying we're so concerned about our achievement gap and not do anything about it, especially when we know we have the data. If we read
I don't think anybody's arguing that. It's like
but
there's no argument about class time, which is where learning is happening. And
it also happens in the hallways, in between class time. It's not this really static.
that is not when math scores are going up, is in the hallway. I'm just saying. I mean, I
I don't want to argue the point with you. What I'm saying is
but
we
you're
have to both say that we want to increase achievement for Black and Brown students and allow what we hear from people that work in the building, administrators, that the times that the bad behavior that we'd like to discourage happens is during lunch and passing.
But you're representing that math scores are going
I don't want to
up
argue.
because, well, I'm just saying,
we have a term that
you're implying that having a lunch exemption is you're against improving student achievement for the students who haven't historically been well served. Because I'll just
share what I saw with my own eyes.
I can just-
saw a group of Black and Brown students missing the bell by a good amount of time, and those are the kids that we claim to want to be successful in.
And I'll just say, PPS was not successful with those students before there were cell phones. So it's what's happening in the classroom that makes the biggest difference. We know that high quality instruction makes the biggest difference. I just want to put that in the record.
And also for the record, teacher practices and standards and curriculum and understanding of how education also improves. And, teachers are constantly improving. How we teach today is way better than how we taught 20 years ago. Is it perfect? No, we still have a long ways to go. But the issue at hand is we still need to talk about reality. If you go visit Benson, you go visit Franklin. I mean, their principals are talking about how to get you under pouches because things have gotten so bad. They've gone bad again. And then you look at the schools that are seeing success as the ones that have adopted the pouches or an all-day policy. And the issue is enforcement, and enforcement in reality. So, like, if you have exceptions here and there, you know, that's the policy that schools have. The reason I use the word status quo is pretty much every high school, almost every high school in our district has the exact same policy before, you know, this year, which is basically off and away during class. And that has not been enforceable. And the ones that have seen success in enforcement and reduction in teacher stress and decrease in referrals and discipline issues are the ones that have gone all day. And that pattern seems to be repeating itself nationally as well. So when we talk about the UK, for example, the entire country used to be off and away in classrooms. They've gone to all day, and they're the ones that have seen the greatest increases. And in districts across the country, same thing. We have the same pattern where the schools that have gone all day are the ones that are seeing success. The schools that have not are the ones that are falling back to old patterns. And again, it's not about, you know, we're arguing about lunch, but the whole point is that we need to argue about reality, what has worked and what hasn't. And so far, all the evidence that we've seen so far shows that the all-day one seems to be the only way that works. So until someone can find something better, but right now we don't.
I would ask, can we recess this conversation until after the facilities committee meeting if you all want to continue it?
Yeah, no, that's, do you want to switch things around and then Herman, I thought I saw
Herman was here. I think he'll be back in
Yeah.
a moment. So
Okay.
yeah, that'd be great.
No, but why don't we switch things around?
Oh, I'm happy to stay here.
Recess. A short recess.
Yes, but very short. I'd like to start ASAP. Well, and
Okay, I'm going to thank you for the discussion, and for those who came to comment, I appreciate it. I do have one thing I just want to note, that currently using your cell phone to harass or bully other students is currently not allowed by our policy. So if that's occurring, whether it's during the school day or non-school day, it is already not allowed, and those should be enforced. And it's not an argument for or against today, but I just want to note, like, students, that's not permissible, even if we didn't allow students. So if students were doing that at night and were harassing another student, that would be a violation of our policy and subject to discipline in the district. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
just so everyone knows, we're going to get going in about 5 minutes. They're just switching over from last committee to this meeting, and then we'll get going. Okay, I believe I have the green light to get going. So I think that's your job, Director Green. Great. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the meeting of the School Facilities Improvement and Operations Committee. Appreciate folks being here tonight. We've got just one thing on the agenda tonight. We're going to talk about a potential referral of the 2024 bond. The order of the agenda, we are going to do public testimony first. So I think we've got 4 people signed up for 2-minute slots. We're going to do that, and then we're going to go into a conversation with the board. Just as a reminder, from a process standpoint, this is one of our board committees, and it is me, Director Green, and Director Brim Edwards who are on that committee. But of course, we welcome all board members to come, and I'm glad we've almost got a full house, with the exception of Director Hollins today for the committee meeting, which is great. I'm going to take 60 seconds before public testimony. mostly just to set a little bit of context for tonight. I hope everyone's had a chance to look at the staff report and materials that were provided to the board a few days ago. They are public. They are on the PPS website. And I did get a number of emails today. Thank you for sending the emails. And I wanted to just, again, provide a little context because I'm a little worried that there might be some misinformation out there in the community. We're going to get into this in a lot more detail, but I know a lot of the emails I received today were focused on concern that we were somehow taking funds away from either the IW Wells or Cleveland restoration. And I want to assure people that is not what's on the table for tonight. So what's on the table for tonight, and there's a whole number of things that are in there, but the funding for school modernizations, which was at about $1.1 billion, is still at $1.1 billion. What you will hear us talk about tonight is the possibility of, can we fit more into that $1.1 billion than we had planned on before? And I'm going to let staff deal with the details around this, but this is really based on the superintendent sort of coming in and saying, you know, we need to be really good fiscal stewards of taxpayer dollars. We know that we can look at what other high schools have been built. We can look at our own high schools, right, that have been built. We know that Lincoln was built. I wrote this down. We do have a full house. Welcome, Director Hollins. Lincoln was finished in 2022 for a budget of $225 million. Lincoln is a beautiful school. If you haven't seen it, it is fantastic. It's got everything that's needed. What the question that the superintendent, I think, rightfully asked is, as we're going through this planning process, what is the target that we want to hit for these new high schools? And that is still an open question. So what you see in the package, and if you look at the language in the memo, you'll see we are not saying that these schools have to come in less. We're saying we hope they can. I hope they can. You should hope they can too, from a community perspective. To be really, really blunt about it, if these high schools cost $425 to $450 million, they won't be the most expensive high schools built in Oregon. They may be the most expensive high schools ever built in the United States. That is not an award that we want to win. And so we need to be really, really prudent with these dollars. But what I love about the staff proposal tonight is that it leaves flexibility. What it says is we're not going to reduce the modernization budget. We're going to keep it at $1.1 billion. If at the end of this process, there is just no way to reduce those high schools, there is enough funding there to build them. But I hope there is, because to the extent there is, it frees up money and potentially significant amount of money for other facility problems in the district, including our middle schools and our elementary schools. And those of you in my zone, which has IDP Wells, know from this last year how devastating those facility failures can be. And so I think that's really what we're trying to talk about and leave some of that flexibility. So with that as a little bit of context, I want to go into public testimony, then staff report, and then we're going to have a conversation. So, Kara, you want to call the first couple people who are signed up?
Yes. Sorry. We have Megan Stepik and Virginia LaForte. You want to both?
Hear me?
Yes, you can go ahead and begin, and your time will start when you start talking.
Okay. Well, good evening, Superintendent Armstrong, PPS board members, Student Representative Consevi. My name is Megan Stefik, that's Steffek. I have two children born in 2008 and 2010, around the time that the Cleveland modernization bond failed, and Cleveland was moved to the back of the line. Like other parents, students, and Cleveland staff who have given testimony here over the past several months, I was shocked to see the neglect of Cleveland High School over the years. I now have a junior who is a captain of the varsity, co-captain, of the varsity softball team and is on track to graduate with a full IB diploma. I have a freshman in band as well as track and field. I am invested in the school community. My children will not see a modernized Cleveland High School. I participate in the PPS Modernization Design Advisory Group for Cleveland High School. I am fascinated by the process and I appreciate the meaningful conversation with stakeholders. Initially, I joined so that this modernization does not repeat the softball discrimination of the past, namely Grant High School in 2019, but also Franklin High School in 2017, Lake Oswego High School in 2016, Gresham High School, San Barlow High School 2022. These are several examples of the Title IX filings and lawsuits in our area. Further, I joined to ensure that even if softball and baseball get turf fields in the design,
that they do not fall short of NFHS regulation field speculations at Pell Park, like McDaniel High School in 2021, where their beautiful new turf fields were unplayable for 2 years after the school reopened. So I represent Turf Pell Park. We are a group of softball and baseball parents initially. That group has grown significantly. Cleveland High School student athletes have dealt with unfair and unsanitary and unsafe conditions at Woodstock Park, Powell Park, Westmoreland Park. Turf fields also increase playability, allow increased playability in Oregon weather conditions and minimize the risk of injuries due to level surfaces, better traction, shock absorption. Lights ensure that we can practice later into the days, into the evenings. Lights and a secure location in close proximity to the high school community will deter theft, vandalism, and destruction. Our students deserve equality in athletic facilities now, not in 2028, when the high school modernization is anticipated to be complete. They deserve facilities that will allow them to thrive amongst the competitive OSAA 6A school programs. I have given public comment, along with others in the Turf Powell Park supporters, at the Portland Parks and Rec Board meetings, asking them to work with PPS leadership toward a mutually beneficial long-term lease of Powell Park. I have received no response. We have received no response. But we have faith. We have faith that discussions are happening. And we are thrilled to see tonight that funds for turf for Powell Park are included in Exhibit A. I urge PPS leadership and PIL leadership to work with PP&R leadership to make this a reality in 2025. I also want to thank you for adding back the $75 million in athletic improvements that was omitted from last board meeting materials, as that will help Grant High School Bowl. It will help Franklin, and it will help Roosevelt.
About your comments.
Okay. So I will speed it up a little bit here.
We're already a couple minutes over your time, so could you just summarize it in a sentence or two? That'd be great.
I see in the memo tonight, and I'm disappointed in the reduction of funds for Cleveland High School. It's about $108 million. I think we need to urge you to have a solid discussion of a quality high school that meets the district's ed specs with equitable athletic facilities if you intend to maintain that $108 million budget cut. I urge you to fully fund the Cleveland remodel at $468 million. And I have listened to discussions here, and I know that we can increase that amount, and Director Scott, you had mentioned that might be part of the discussion tonight, but maintain the tax rate. So I urge you to continue that discussion, and I know that the Cleveland community will support what you put forth in the May 2025 bond.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Virginia Lafort, L-A-F-O-R-T-E. I'm here today on behalf of the Granville Community Coalition to comment on the outdoor facilities and athletic improvement portion of the 2025 bond. The last FNO meeting, the Grant High School Master Plan, the Granville Master Plan was removed from the bond proposal, which was really shocking to us. And we see today that it's been added back into the scope, and the grant community strongly encourages that. We're a little wary because we see it coming in and out and in and out. Because we're dealing with the facility that has been set aside repeatedly for 100 years now, we'd like to ask the committee to draft and refer a resolution to the full board that directs the district to fund phase 2 of the Granville Master Plan so that there is no question that there is the full support of the board and we're not worried about disappearing, off into the sunset again. The back and forth just can't continue. The preliminary work is done. The Master Planning Committee was formed. They've met. They created an excellent plan in 2019. We're not starting from scratch, and PPS finally has control of the bowl. It's just time. And a little off script here. It would be like if we were talking about these modernizations and you were sitting there going, we're just gonna, we need to save a little bit of money. We're just gonna cut the lights, cut the field from, say, Cleveland or Wells, and they can just handle it for a little while. They'll be fine. That has been happening to Grant for literally the entire existence of the high school. Of course, we would never suggest that anything like that happen, but it's just how you feel when you're sitting in the shoes of anyone who is continually dealing with this problem at school. On that note, pivot. We also would like to ask the district to seriously consider incorporating additional outdoor facility improvements into the bond to allow for these improvements at elementary and middle schools. As it is, you have a significant amount of undeveloped outdoor space that has been reduced to nothing more than mud and an occasional mowing if we're lucky. I'm almost done. I saw that West Sylvan is called out in the new bond proposal, which is great, but there are other schools, particularly in North and Northeast, like Beaumont, Ockley Green, George, that desperately need outdoor upgrades. These are high impact, and when you're looking at a bond, these are high impact, low dollar upgrades that can be executed very quickly. And if you're looking at it like a business, this is the one thing that you can do that can actually generate money. These fields in this space should be managed like a business for these schools. And I remember years ago when I was doing research on lead and running across a document that said that PPS is an internal document to the superintendent that said that PPS is not in the business of real estate. That is literally how we ended up in the mess we're in today. So we are, and this is the one piece of business that I feel like you guys can really benefit from taking a hard look at the revenue that could be generated from these upgrades.
Thanks. Thanks for the testimony. Okay, Kara, can you call the next two?
Yes. Kirsten Carr and Cannon Walter.
Sure. Great. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me time to speak on behalf of the IDB Wells community. My name is Cam Walter. I'm a sophomore at IDB Wells, involved in school athletics, the leadership, and a few clubs, including the IDB Wells Modernization and Design Club. I'm also the older brother of an 8th grader who is excited to attend Wells next year. I'm here today to advocate on two main bond inclusions. First, please prioritize the completion of IDB Wells and Cleveland High School modernizations as approved by the board in May 2024, in alignment with the comprehensive plan to provide essential updates including AC, classroom upgrades, and facilities upgrades to our buildings. These building modernizations are vitally important for our community, our students, staff, families, and neighbors. This is not the time to cut corners or eliminate essential upgrades to our learning environments. We need equitable and safe facilities which provide opportunities for students to excel in an environment conducive to learning. Second, please ensure athletic hubs are included in the bond budget. The elimination of athletic hubs from the proposed budget is problematic. Athletic hubs are essential for supporting state-mandated physical education curriculum, sports, extracurricular activities, and ensuring equity across the district. Athletic hubs will also preserve continued access, particularly for schools that may lack adequate facilities now or during planned construction. For example, IDB Wells will not have enough outdoor field space available in Southwest Portland to meet our school needs during our modernization project. Jackson Middle School has been approved as our cluster's local athletic hub already. As an athlete with personal experience in practicing playing at Jackson, it has nowhere near the resources currently that would allow for our athletes to compete. Vital upgrades need to be made to the fields for our athletes to participate at the same level that we currently are able to at IDB Wells. This option for the Jackson Athletics is not currently included in the bond budget and should be. I do understand that it may not be an IDB Wells student when the modernization is complete, but my brother may be as a member of the class of 2029. And our neighborhood elementary students undoubtedly will. I'm almost done. And our amazing IDB Wells teachers and staff will also have the opportunity to teach in a building that encourages learning and positive engagement from their students. That is why I am here today, to advocate for the future of IDB Wells and our community. It is vitally important that this board, you all, as decision makers, continue to maintain your commitment to advocating for equitable and safe facilities, creating opportunities for students to learn and excel in an environment that is encouraging learning. We appreciate your follow through in ensuring the Wells and Cleveland modernizations are fully funded and the Southwest Portland Athletic Hub is included in the bond budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Kirsten Carr, last name is C-A-R-R. First, I wanted to say I'm trying to practice more gratitude, especially this time of year, and I really wanted to express some gratitude to the board and also to the staff. I was fully prepared to read this latest proposal. I'd be really upset about it because I think we're trained to be really upset about things. And I was really happy. I felt like it was a reflective listening exercise where board members and community members have been saying for weeks and months, hey, these are the things that we are liking and wanting and needing. And the district staff said, what I'm hearing you say is you want more responsible spending. What I'm hearing you say is you want a look at the curriculum to see if we really need to spend that much money. What I'm hearing you say is, and every point is on this proposal. So just to be clear and to say it again, we're not losing $108 million from our schools. We're challenging these guys and these guys to really look at the money that we're spending and spend it well, and to take the savings and to spread it around everyone else. Because if we truly have $470 million extra dollars for modernization for elementary and middle schools, that's going to have a huge impact across the district on everyone. So I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say all of what he said, so just listen to what Cannon said. I've known this kiddo for a while. He's amazing. And all of what he said. Definitely I'm making some assumptions, and I'm going to hold everyone to that. I'm assuming that you're not going to cut quarters in the things that are important, that ed specs are not going to get cut, that you're going to have a reasonable plan for our athletes to be able to continue practicing even if our fields are under construction, and that you're going to make this the most cost-effective and yet still livable environment for our students. I really don't think we need to make the most beautiful space because our kids are already super attracted to all the hallways with their cell phones, but I would like a space where we can continue to offer excellent education, offer more CTE than almost any other school in the district at Ida B. Wells, and have all of our AP class offerings.
Thank you. And Kara, those are who signed up, right? And I believe we have our PAT president, Bonilla, here. Welcome. And has also requested to address us for a couple minutes on this issue. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Rushing from a doctor's appointment. I appreciate the time. Thank you. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to the proposed reduction of $108 million from the original budget. As maybe y'all also experienced, I had several emails from high school educators and conversations and concerns, right? What we've seen in previous modernizations is a promise to have things like 80% utilization at Kellogg that then turned into 100% utilization. And those are the types of, ed specifications that are really important when we talk about the experience that our students and our educators have at schools, right? And so I just wanted to kind of lift up, I understand the importance of looking at the finances and trying to make sure that we get more bang for our buck, especially knowing that there's so much deferred maintenance that needs to be updated across all of our schools. And we know, and the reason I think we started with high schools is because all of our students will go to some of these high schools, right? For the most part, most of our comprehensive high schools. But there is a really big concern that all the planning and all the work that was done in conjunction with educators around what our schools should look like moving forward with the bond might be jeopardized by this change without necessarily having that feedback from folks who will have to work in those buildings about what that experience will feel like. So things I've heard from educators in high schools, a lot of these spaces in some of our modernized high schools are built to kind of emulate maybe higher education. So there are spaces that can't be utilized for classrooms or confidential conversations. We have schools that are at 100% utilization, which means that they end up having a space used, all spaces are used all points of the day. So if a student needs to have a confidential conversation with a counselor, they got to find that counselor because that counselor is not in an office or a classroom that is consistent. Same with flex time, and I'm sure seniors and high school students know that you have flex days and you can't necessarily find that educator because they might be in a different room based on the day, based on the schedule. So I think I would really want to emphasize the importance of looking at how will these schools be built in a way that will ensure that we give the highest quality educational experience to all of our students that our educators can provide. Because even if you can put us all into the building and have each classroom utilized, you still have educators literally using shopping carts to move their things around, and we want to make sure that they feel that that school is a home just like we want to make sure schools feel like a home to our students. I am definitely excited about the prospect of increasing modernization and kind of spreading some of that help to our middle and elementary schools. I also know that y'all have a really big challenge, right? There's so many competing needs and there's only so much you can ask for in a bond. So I don't wish to be in your shoes, and I appreciate the mindful and thoughtful work that's going into this. And I would love to know specifics around, I went through the documents, but what exactly will that $108 million be earmarked for in terms of specific sites, specific projects, and how those would go through? Because I think that's the level of accountability and detail that will help folks who have been planning, especially these high school modernizations, feel like, okay, this isn't just someone saying, thanks for your feedback, we're putting that in the trash, but actually saying, thank you for your feedback, here's some more information, here's some more needs, here's how we're going to use these funds to actually support our entire community. So I would ask that we just make sure that that communication is still very open, it's very clear, and that it's consistently going out to our families, our educators, our students in our community, that when they vote yes to pass this bond, because our community always shows up for our schools, and we've seen that year and time and time again, that they know exactly where those funds are going. And PAT, we will be championing and pushing for that approval of this bond for our city. And we want to make sure that we can speak to how great these changes will be with details. So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to share, and thank you for giving me some time to do that today.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm only one board member, but I hope the process to date has been effective in including educator voices. It feels like that when I see the design advisory group.
Yes.
But I hope you also feel like you have a direct line to the district if it feels like we're falling short in any way, because that input from the folks who are working in the building is the only way to make those buildings successful. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think that was it for testimony. So thanks everybody. And now I will call the team up and let you all take it from here. Dan and his folks were all set up and ready to go, and then I switched it up on them and I said, we're going to do testimony first. So
The lights on. Oh, there we go. We have a presentation for you tonight. The run of show is we're going to go through these agenda items relatively quickly. We're going to have various staff come up to the table and provide overviews of the different scopes of work and different categories, and then take questions. And so we'll move through it, I think, fairly quick, and there's probably lots of questions that we want to get to. So first we'll start here is the proposed option, and as I noted, we'll talk through each one of these. I'll just note here that the total amount is $18 million below that range of $1.8 billion, so we have a little bit of wiggle room, but not a lot of wiggle room if that is still what the range is with those parameters. And the proposed option continues to conform to these parameters that we've talked about in the last number of meetings, including targeting a total bond between 1.5 and 1.8 billion. It's obviously at the top end of that. Planning for an 8-year bond cycle, retaining the existing tax rate, and planning for the next ballot in May of 25. We'll jump right into scope of work. Deferred maintenance in our fiscal facility improvements is one of the categories of work that totals $190 million, which is the same as the last iteration. As we've discussed a lot, PBS has very big capital needs, and $190 million over 8 years is a significant amount of money. 8 to 10 years is what we roughly anticipate it would cost to spend it all. But it's a relatively small investment considering the size of PBS's portfolio and the existing conditions. So what this here shows, and which is included in the staff report, is is a scenario, a sample scenario of how those funds might be spent over that duration. It assumes that roughly a third of this amount would be needed to address emergency and high priority projects, so about $5 to $10 billion a year, which is in the range of what we spend now. That could be more over the life of the bond. And the remaining amount would be allocated to address some of the most critical needs across a variety of scopes of work. With deferred maintenance, capital renewal, and priority project scopes totaling in the many billions of dollars, and a lack of non-bond capital funding, flexibility for these funds is really going to be critical. I believe if we try to be too specific of where these funds are going to go for those specific projects, we might tie our hands to address urgent needs down the line as we get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or more years into the bond. So that's what I have for the deferred maintenance fiscal improvements. Are there any questions on that? And we can come back to this as well. Sure.
So a question on don't tie our hands. I'm going to agree with Angela I think we need to be specific. All parents and students know how bad many of our facilities are, and it seems like I have so many notebooks at home from you, Dan, and the team about our needs. It seems like at a minimum, instead of we need to have the money set aside for like emergencies, that seems like a reactive way versus we've done here's what the condition is or the life cycle of different systems in our schools that we could at least have some sort of guidelines of, like, for example, the roofs, like those that are over X number of years over, those would be in the first cycle. Because what I'm concerned about is just having a long list. Doesn't tell voters exactly how we're going to prioritize. And I know that, because I've listened to you for over a decade, that we do have things that we want to prioritize, and how do we frame that up in a way that is specific enough so people know, like, hey, we're not going to allow the leaky roof to then like ruin the interior of our buildings because we've made a commitment in this bond with this amount of money that roofs that are over this number of years are going to be first to be replaced. And we're going to set aside a certain amount for those things that we don't anticipate, but we know some of these things have to be replaced. So I'm wondering, you could be more specific about how you're going to prioritize them, knowing what we know about our facilities.
Sure, it's a good question. I think if we have a specific dollar amount, we can start to hone in a little more on some specifics. And the dollar amount has obviously been changing as we've gone through this process. If we look at the deferred maintenance category, that's some of the categories of work that are in our facilities condition assessment, which is a few years old now. The total amount of those categories of work, plus a couple others, is over $1 billion of things that are effectively broken now or past their useful life now. So almost a number of these categories, you could apply all of that to just that one category of work. So for roofs or exterior enclosures, that's going to total over $190 million of what our systems say we should be replacing right now. What this tries to show is we want to be able to spread those across a number of scopes of work. We know when an elevator fails, we try to limp it along. If we have an existing elevator, we have some really old elevators as an example. We try to limp them along for as much as possible. Eventually, that cab will have to be replaced. That might be $500,000. And it's already been through useful life now, but it might fail next year or it might fail in 8 years. And so that's what I mean. The flexibility is we want to get in front of this as much as possible. We also know that when there is that unexpected piece or something starts leaking more than we anticipated, we want to be able to allocate those funds as quickly as we can and have funds to do that. I certainly understand this. We don't want this to be an opaque process. We want to be very clear of how we prioritize. We have prioritization matrices of when new capital projects come in. So I think we can be very clear with that. But I would just caution against saying over 10 years being too precise how we're going to spend those funds, because in 5 years the urgent needs could be different than what they are today.
I have a similar question on that very first line item, the emergency uncleared projects. In the, we lost school time in Southwest Portland this year due to the ice storm in January or February. And would the $5 million to $10 million be enough to have covered the damage that we experienced this year? I mean, and so that's one question. The other one is, I like that it's somewhat flexible. I mean, it's kind of all bubbled under deferred maintenance, but I would also like to have some type of criteria so we know how the decisions are being made. And then also would like to see some flexibility if a tree falls on a school that's not in our list. Would our plan provide the flexibility that we need to address the tree falling in the building?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the intent in that first category is just to sort of estimate what we're really seeing now and maybe what we might see in the future for emergencies. And these are things that are unexpected. We had a sewer line failure recently, so we had to address that right away, and that was $200,000 or whatever that is. Because of the age of the schools, we're probably going to see more of those. Now, to Director Permetter's point is we want to get in front of those as much as possible. That said, that list to get in front of them is beyond the total amount of funds that we have. So we know to a certain degree we're going to be reactionary, and we want to be able to have the funds and the flexibility to do that. The event that happened, the ice storm last year, was pretty unique as far as the impact and the cost. We haven't seen, as I understand, the district hasn't seen anything like that in decades from people who've been here for decades. So that's unique. But outside that, we are spending somewhere in the $5+ million range right now on emergency projects. We have roughly 1 to 2 a month.
I wanted to sort of maybe a question for my colleagues, because when I look at this list, it actually looks pretty specific to me. I mean, we're estimating 9 to 12 roof projects for $60 million, or 3 to 5 exterior enclosures for $10 million. What does more specificity look like to you, particularly from a bond referral, bond package?
Well, it says sample, so it's like we could choose from this, or we could do something else. So,
right.
A sampling is like it could be some other things.
Right.
So, if we're going to do these things, that's more specific, and then how we're going to make those decisions would be understandable.
Yeah. But we wouldn't want to limit ourselves to a list that we put out now. To Dan's point, we need good governance for the district would allow that flexibility, right?
I think we have an obligation to taxpayers to tell them what we're going to utilize generally the money for. So yeah, I do think we need to be more specific. And this doesn't say like which schools, which is why I was trying to get like what's the prioritization process? Because I'll just say you can pick some schools in the district, and they will say, and I'll pick Cleveland because my daughter went there with the leaky roofs. It's like, okay, how come the roof didn't get replaced there? Or Jefferson, they've got a whole host of facilities issues, and understanding how it's going to be prioritized to me is going to be important.
So
and I don't think just saying a sample, like here's a sample list, that could mean we spend the money on anything.
So I would separate it into two different pieces. I actually, we may just have a fundamental disagreement. I think we owe it to the taxpayers to run the district in the most efficient and effective way possible. And I think limiting us, locking us in right now to something to spending money over the course of the bond that may not be where it's most needed, I think would be a bad decision, and that I hope voters would not support. I think the question of prioritization is an interesting and important one. I don't think it's important from a bond referral standpoint. I think it's important from an overall facility maintenance standpoint. I think it's also pretty operational, but to the extent that the board was interested in getting involved in terms of, how are we prioritizing facilities project, major maintenance projects, those are certainly questions that at any time the board, could ask and really talk about that criteria, maybe something we want to do. But again, I would never want to include criteria in, say, legally binding criteria in a bond, and I certainly wouldn't want to lock us into, making sure we replace, 10 playgrounds for $2.5 million. because that may be the highest priority when we get there, or maybe the thing we should do, but other things may come up, and I think we need that flexibility. Dr. Johns, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree with Director Scott as well as far as needed flexibility. We're talking about school is going to be 8 to 10 years. And we really want to talk about being transparent with our community and with our taxpayers, right? We are, and this is a report from 2021. We have $992 million worth of backlogs, which, going by the report, is going to take us somewhere around $70 million a year just to maintain that. So we're really talking about really letting the taxpayers know what we need. Well, we need the $70 million a year. So that means, and I'm going to go back and say it again, 1.8 is not going to cut it. So if we're really talking about what we need as a district and what our kids need to be able to maintain it, because if not, we're going to be back here in a few years with other schools that are in the same predicament, or we're going back to the schools that we modernize again, going back to fix those that we don't maintain a level of deferred maintenance. 1.8 is not going to get us that level of deferred maintenance that we need. And so if we're putting it out there to the community and our taxpayers, yeah, we're going to spend what we can, what we got, but it's not going to be enough, and they need to know that. It's not going to be enough in the overall maintenance that we need to uphold all of our facilities that we have. And so we need to do something about it now, or we kick it down the road and we do it like 8 years from now.
That's why I was a little bit surprised by and this gets to a future slide, of the 470 that was going into modernization, and is it actually, I don't like to say the word deferred maintenance, but deferred maintenance priority scopes and improvements versus, if we have $900 million or $1 billion worth of those, is that what we're talking about, or are you talking about actually the modernization that term here at PPS has meant a full rebuild, versus if we have another 470 million, we actually could be potentially really good stewards and fix a lot of our systems, or have modern HVACs in all of our schools. So I'm curious. Are you concluding that the 470?
Let's answer that question when we get to that section of the presentation.
Yeah, because to me, then it's we're operating in a time of scarcity when 3 slides later, it's oh, we have 470 million. So this is our highest priority. So it's more, I'm interested in definitions when we get there.
We'll get to that. Why don't you keep going then, unless there are other questions on the deferred maintenance. We'll have time at the end to come back.
And this also, this wouldn't get us to full ADA compliance, because it has 2 elevators.
Yeah, this sample shows 2 elevators, 2 new elevators. The full, I'd have to look back at the materials from a previous meeting, but to address full compliance to multi-level, it was somewhere north of $100 million total estimate.
I think it was $100 million last bond, and we put 50 something in to get all the first floors done.
I need to double check that. Okay, we are going to move on to athletic improvements. In the materials is an updated sample scope for improvements to our athletic fields. It's $75 million. With me, I have Marshall Haskins, our Senior Director of Athletics, to give just a quick overview of what those funds would include and answer questions you might have.
Coach Moise, can you hear me? Okay, great, okay. So what our improvements here listed are just to get our high schools all completed. So going back to Roosevelt and the original bond, we never completed the athletic fields. And for 5 years, we couldn't even use the baseball, softball field, right? So these funds would just get us covered for Franklin, for Grant, for Roosevelt, and for West Hill, and for Lincoln. It's just getting us done what we said we were going to do originally with those. And also make sure that we've completed with the modernization of Jefferson, Wells, and Cleveland. We will then have all of our high schools at a bare minimum of what we need for turf fields and lights. We'd be able to deal with or miss the Title IX lawsuit that's going to be pending if we don't do it at a couple of sites that, namely Cleveland, has already concerned about, and rightfully so concerned about the distance between baseball and softball. And if we turf park for baseball and softball, it doesn't have it. So this gets our high school all complete. It doesn't, however, deal with the fact that any lower level teams and games are still going to be at Delta Park, are still getting kids out of class because we don't have athletic hubs that we own and control. But this does take care of all of our high schools. I have a question. So in the other previous bonds, none of these things were included in called value engineering. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that it was clear that none of these was included in the last bonds. And once again, this is why the decisions we make today is going to be so important on the amount of funds that we ask our community for, because here we are, I don't know, when Roosevelt was built 10 years ago almost, something like that. Now we're back here finishing up something that happened 10 years ago. We should not make that same mistake today and for 10 years later on. So when we talk about what we really need for our bonds, we have to look at not just what's going to fix it today, but also what's going to take care of 10 years from now, because we shouldn't be coming back 10 years or 15 years from now talking about we need to do something at Cleveland and Ida-B Wells. So it doesn't make sense at that point.
I really appreciate you bringing that, Director Holland. So my question is going to be, if you go back to the three modernizations, which I'm very much supportive, having from the 2020 bond and then the two high schools in this bond that are proposed, with the reduced amount of funds.
I just want to, there's not a reduced amount.
Pardon?
There's not a reduced amount. It's still $1.15 billion for modernizations.
For the Cleveland amount and the materials are provided, Cleveland has a lower amount, so does I.
The target is lower, but the total amount for funding is the same.
But this is not my point. I'm trying to ask a question about athletics.
I'm just saying factually we need to be clear about what's happening.
The number has been reduced from what they had before for Ida-B Wells and Cleveland, correct?
No.
It's now the proposal was
There's a target to get it down to 360.
Okay. The
but
target,
that does not mean,
the reduction target.
360.
I'm just trying to get my question out because I'm trying to build off of Director Holland's point. And this is, I think, a question for you, Dan. Are the ed specs staying the same for the athletics? So again, to avoid 10 years from now us talking about, well, we didn't include enough funds for Cleveland to get theirs done, or Ida-B Wells to get their fields done, so we don't have a coming back 10 years later with a new target amount.
New target amount. So what the teams have been tasked to do is to take a look at options to reduce to those target amounts. And so that'll be a process that they'll go through that will have several iterations in it. So we'll just kind of give like the process, I guess, answer first. So the teams are right now going and looking at what some potential cost reduction options are. We have a third-party study that might give us some potential options to look at. They will then get stakeholder feedback on those options. I presume before it comes to the board, so there's some sense of what the stakeholders who have been a part of the process to date, if there are changes, what the stakeholder community, staff, students, what their input is on those changes. Then there will be a formal cost estimating effort, and then ultimately a presentation to the board of the committee, and then an approval. So that's the process that we are embarking on now. I would say where we're targeting is where do we see deltas between what other projects were before or other projects that are out there. Where can we look at potential reductions such as reducing to code requirements and not exceeding code requirements, potentially looking at the ed specs, what the ed spec minimums are and not above ed spec minimums. Those are some where we'll expect to see some square footage come down. But the goal is to retain as much program as possible, focusing on what that student experience is. So there isn't a directive to say reduce here or reduce athletics. It's going to be what are the best potential options that we get feedback on that could reduce these projects.
So when we get to the end or when we get to the actual modernization projects, I'd like to have a specific conversation about the ed specs and sort of the basic, what are the fundamentals and whether those are in play or not, so that just, and some of them might be the right thing to do, put some things in play, and other ones we're like, no, we've told all the high school communities to get those, so at some point I'd like to have that conversation, because I just think we should all understand if we're going to reduce scope, if it's reducing scope from something that's over the ed specs down to the ed specs, or we're not doing an ed spec, and are we okay with that?
And then thank you. I appreciate the questions. I just want to jump in here. Just to add that I appreciate the emphasis from Director Scott, because the number that I think folks hold on to that's applied to the high schools are numbers that were established or at least talked about before we even had a design. I mean, that's just like saying that, hey, this is this $500 million mark that you have now, go and create, and then you create something and it only costs like $350 million, and then folks are like, oh, but what about the reductions? We lost this, this, and this. Well, it's not that it was lost, it's that it was a pretty big number to start with. And I think just bringing back in the earlier point, there's no high school that's built in the state of Oregon on the West Coast across the United States for over $450 million for a single high school site. And so while we definitely believe that our numbers were significant and enough to be able to plan for a high school, I believe that it was an inflated number, and I think that we have information that will tell us in the coming weeks of why that number was inflated. I believe that we can build schools for less than that based on what we're seeing happening around the map. And to Director Scott's point, if there are some things, we know that there might be a change in cost, there might be some inflation, we still have a bucket of funds that can be applied. If, let's say, maybe we're shooting for 366 and it comes out at 380 or 390, but to the date, there's no high school that's been built in Portland for even close to $400 million, and that includes Benson when you remove High-U campus from it. So I just wanted to just emphasize and reiterate that there is one bucket of funds for modernization, and I believe that Jefferson, Cleveland, and Ida B. Wells will be big, will be beautiful, will be built for $1,700 and have all the things that the community and teachers desire, and still not be at that number, because we do need to make sure that we're building in an audacious way and making sure that we have the ability to heat our buildings when we need to, and we can cool them when we need to, and we can continue to care and maintain them along the way. And the only way to do that is to be mindful of the ways in which we spend funds for our schools.
I think that's what I wanted to make sure that I was chiming in, just getting back to Dan to follow up on, was that the request that I had, or when I brought up saying that I'd like to do a construction audit, was not to say that I want us to look at how we can get the cost down. My concern was after talking with builders and superintendents and project managers across the country from a lot of these conferences that I've been going to. Thank you for allowing me to go to these conferences. It allows me to ask a lot of questions, hard questions, that we were doing everything backwards, that we were coming in and saying that this is our number, now go build a school to this number, and nowhere else in the country are they doing that. When I talk to the different ones across the country, what I'm finding is that they say, we want a school, and then an architectural firm comes in and they say, this is what it's going to take, this is what the school is going to look like. They draft up some stuff, they work with community, different ones, whoever else, you get them all involved, and they say, this is what the school is going to could look like, and then they work with a project manager or a construction manager, who then in turn says, okay, is this school actually buildable? Can we build this school that y'all have actually done? And then they do that, and then after they have found out that yes, we can't build this school, then it goes to a general contractor, and the general contractor actually builds the school that the architectural firm has designed. And when the architectural firm designs it, they also lay out, this is how much a school should cost, that building it to this is what it should cost, and then they go out and they do it. What we've been doing is saying, okay, we got X amount of money, and then go build us a school, but come in as low as you can. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that at all. I'm getting all the money that I can possibly get out of you. If you come and tell me, you know what I'm saying, you tell me I got $460 million to build a school, I'm gonna build it for 480 because I think I can pull from you. And then that's just me. And I know if I'm thinking that, then every other contractor out there in the world is thinking that, and they trying to get that money. And Portland, so far, has been the place where you get your bag. And so what I'm trying to say is I want us to look at a full-on construction audit to say, are we doing it the right way? Now, if we do everything that we're doing, and I feel like it should be done from outside, because I don't even, the way that we've done it, right now we've got our construction manager and our general contractor are all in the same pot, and there's no checks and balances. So now there can be a change order done, and they say, oh yeah, we need it, and then they go ahead because we need it, and then it's all done because they're all part of the same household, and you know what I'm saying, they all eat at the same Christmas table. And I know we got a wall up in between us, and so we try to subdivide ourselves, but at the end of the day, you still my cousin, and so I'm gonna make sure that you eat. And so I'm thinking that, is that the right way? Because nowhere else in the States is doing it that across the country, not even in Oregon. Most of the Oregon schools and places that are building, they separate the general contractor from the construction manager with the project manager. And I know there's a space, a time, and a place where you can say, well, it makes it ease the convenience of trying to get stuff done, but do we need that ease or do we need it right? And so I'm looking for checks, balances, and accountability. And that's what this audit was supposed to do. Not come back and say, okay, we're going to look at how we can reduce the scope, get it down so that we can get it at this cost. Even saying that, we're doing it the wrong way. I think we need the audit to say, are we doing it the correct way? Should we be allowing the architectural firm to set it? And then if they come back and they say it's going to cost $500 million, well then, it is what it is. Go get the money. Let's figure out how to get it done, and let's fix it. But without doing that, I think we're out of line. And I think that's why I'm saying that's where I thought we were at. That's what I thought this was about. So to hear that it's just, we've been tasked to figure out how we can do it for less, that's not what I was asking. I was never asking nobody to do that. I said do a construction audit. Tell us if what we're doing is the right way, and should we be doing it different. I did not say go reduce it to 360, because if we can get it done for 2, then get it done for 2. But if it's going to cost us 4, then spend 4. I just want to know that we're doing it the right way, and I think the community, I think that's what they want to know. And so that's where I sit with that.
Before we leave this athletics improvement slide, Dan, I'm going to go back to your answer. I think your answer was maybe on whether Cleveland and Ida B. Wells, that would be included. I mean, you described a long process, but it wasn't like, yes, what we've got in now is what's going to end up. I just want to I don't want to mischaracterize you, but I didn't hear clear one way or the other, but it's like there'll be a process, but it wasn't like, yes, for sure, it would still be in.
What, let me try to be more clear. I don't know what exactly the process, the outcome is going to be. What I do anticipate is it's going to provide options to say, here are, let's make a menu, but here are some cost reduction options that get you to a number. And maybe that's your target and maybe not. And also there's going to be an option that says, here's how to get to your number. And that might be deeper cuts than what you want. So maybe you want to go back to a larger number, a different number. Does that make sense? We're not being prescriptive of saying, just get there.
Right. This is going to go back to, I guess, my question that I have about just general ed specs that we can touch on later, but because they're one of many specifications we have. So my other question is, I had proposed last week a $97 million package, which had the $75 million in, and then plus it had funds for, partial funds for the hubs, with some money for Jackson not doing the full hub build out. I mean, they're pretty expensive, but enough that there would be spaces for swing athletics for Ida B. Wells, and then my understanding was the Marshalls would be the sort of Franklin overflow, and that there's discussions happening with Concordia, which would be the sort of northeast quadrant. And I'm just curious about if the decision is not to make those investments. They're not in this current, like, are you saying that that means students are going to Delta Park probably?
Yes, we'll still be at Delta Park. We'll still be leaving school early. We'll still be going to North Clackamas for softball games at the middle of the day. We'll still be doing some of those things.
And what about the IW Wells, like?
And IW Wells, that's a conundrum we're going to have to figure out. We were able to move Lincoln to Wells, doing Lincoln's modernization, because Wells actually had a practice field, a stadium, and Reiki. Well, right now, if that's offline, then we're going to be, like, literally Lincoln also went to Marshall at 8 o'clock to practice lacrosse. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're going to have to do if we don't do some type of overflow at Jackson, which would be the nearest place for them. And usually there's dollars in the bond for what's my word? Swing site. I would like Director Brim, I'd like to go back to your other question about will athletics be taken care of the bond versus not taken care of when we get to the value engineering. Looking at past experiences, the lessons learned, we just want to make sure they're in the scope. When they're in the scope, they haven't been value engineered out. When they have not been in the scope, meaning board approved prior to, they have always been value engineered out. So I would just ask that we make sure they're in the scope, which then gets to the conversation that Dan's talking about when you get to discuss what we're going to do or not do. I just want to, if we're at the table, I feel confident. Well, I feel the communities that will be impacted will be there to have a voice to advocate for what they think their communities need.
Marshall, if we did find another $25 million for athletics, where would you put it? Where would you put the next $25 million in addition to what's on?
I would put, in addition to this, I put at Marshall and Jackson. Those would be the two places I would put.
So starting those hubs, I mean, the total amounts for those hubs was quite a bit more.
Yeah, quite getting them started on that.
I have a question on, I guess it's not here, but I've got Exhibit B, staff proposed athletic improvement on my screen here. And it's got the athletic hubs.
Yeah, so
What does that mean?
Director Sullivan, on that Exhibit B, what you see in the middle column, that $169 million, that's from the discussion back in March.
Okay.
And then the pared down version, the $75 million is what's here. And that's, sort of the trade-off is we dropped that almost $100 million, $95 million, what came off the table and what new things were on there. So
I think Director Scott's question was, if we get you another 25, then we would add some of the hubs back.
Go back up to this.
Not
You
all
want
of the hubs, but some of the hubs.
what you could do.
So if you're asking me, what would I'm with Director Hollins, we need a little 169. I mean, because at the end of the day, we're still got middle school sports we haven't addressed. And we have a robust 6,000 kids that are participating. We're anticipating adding some additional OSA sports like lacrosse, which will be added. We're adding boys volleyball, we'll be adding girls football, flag football, and right now we're going to probably say no, that we don't have the space to offer those things. So,
great.
My 2 cents is avoiding having had kids for 12 years, all 3 seasons playing sports, is to avoid we're going to go to Delta Park option, with the exception of, and nothing against True North.
I was just going to say something. Hold on, Claire.
But it's like, if you try and go there after school, it's impossible. And it's just not, it also relies on some kids having cars and parents, not being able to go to games. I mean, and they're missing school. It's just not a great option if we're concerned about instructional time, because you've got to leave really early. So I would hope, and again, I don't know, I mean, we have to, if we're going to move ahead with IW Wells, we can't just say you're not going to have athletics for 2 years. So somehow we have to have some solution.
Could I just offer one other thought too, is the reality is we have schools that are they're figured out on their own. And so we talk about the inequities across our system. And I have a school that rents Hillsborough Stadium for baseball because they don't have baseball in their community, right? We have other schools that are renting all kind of places to utilize for athletics because they don't have it within their community. And then it does become a have and a have not when some schools are playing on turf and some schools are not playing on turf. When we look at the success or failure of sports, of our league and places that have full athletics facilities, their teams just do better because they have more opportunity to practice. People that can afford to go to hitting facilities, their baseball and softball teams are better than the ones who don't. It's pretty simple because they're hitting all year versus teams that can only hit when it's not raining outside. So it is also an equity issue that you have an opportunity to address by maintaining the bond and then making sure it's in the scope for the new builds and then upping the number so we'll be able to provide what we need across our district.
Can I just ask a really quick question before you move on? Director Haskins, I heard a comment about our facilities being used to generate funds. So whether the existing fields that we have now or even the start of some hubs or any of the sites that we have now income generating, or is that the plan in the future?
Well, I think the answer is yes and yes. So yes, there are some because in civic use of buildings, they do generate revenue. I think that by having more fields, especially the hubs, and then at hitting cages, I mean, there's districts that are doing $200,000 to $300,000 a year just on hitting facilities. Now, will we get that if we have 9? No, but we might get 100,000 each one easily, and then whether that's me then convincing that those dollars go directly to athletics, I don't know, but I think they certainly will come into the coffers for us to use. Turf fields, we would be able to rent every hour available that we're not using it between 6 and 10 every single night for soccer, guaranteed, if we have turf fields.
So I'm just wondering if we can have a number to bring back to the board for the next committee meeting. I appreciate that. I think that would be helpful not only for the board, but for the public as well.
Okay. Real quick, because we got $1.5 billion still to go through. So.
It should be $3 billion, but when we talk about the middle school turfs, I'm looking over here that we have just like Ockley Green, George, Lane, Beaumont, those other schools. By investing in those, would that help relieve any of the other ones as well? Absolutely, yes.
Great. Let's do technology and curriculum, please, or technology and then curriculum.
Good evening. I'm Derek Brown, Interim Chief Technology Officer for the district. Can you hear me? Is this better? Okay. I am Derek Brown, the Interim Chief Technology Officer for the district. Tonight we're going to talk about, first, this exciting news, the $46 million reduction. The last time you saw this number, it was at $222 million. And after further evaluation, conversations with Don Wolf, Dr. Armstrong, and right-sizing, because when we put these numbers together originally, they were estimates. We've had some deeper conversations with vendor partners to get to where we are, and it is a $46 million reduction to give that money back to the bond. So I think that's what we heard. We listened, and we have reacted. The first one is the ERP modernization, which you know about, our 25 plus year system that needs to be replaced. And this $38 million is for that full business modernization. Staff and devices, this is an 8-year also refresh. That number is reduced significantly. Also to right size, as you know, cost of technology has gone down and is continuing to go down. We're forecasting as best we can of what we know today cost will be to replace. And then it is a refresh 4 years after that. And technology is going to change. And we'll be working very closely with Office of Teaching and Learning. Who knows what we're going to be doing as we innovate. And another way to reduce this, and we haven't done this in the past, we're going to do it, and I'm excited to talk about it, is work with our students. We're going to be working with our middle school and high school students to augment our staff to have student techs. More to come in a couple of years of how we build that through CTE programs, but we will not be the only district in the Northwest or in the country to do it, but I'm excited to bring it here to Portland. That brings inclusion, brings excitement, and also create skills with students who may not have thought about using technology or entering into the space with certifications as well. So more to come in that, but that also reduces the cost and the repair because we're doing it ourselves versus partnering and paying someone else to do it. Of course, you already know about our data center costs, and this is technical debt. We've been working on it for our past couple of bonds, but this bond gets us to the final place of having access points in every classroom, cooling in our data centers, and of course the continuance of cybersecurity to prevent us from having attacks. It doesn't stop it, but it is a monitoring and tools and prevention method. So what questions do you have?
Well, first of all, thank you for, not a question, but thank you for scrubbing the numbers and delivering on a lot of really important things at a
It's going to be hard.
cost-effective way.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging, but we have to do it. We have to do it for our kids.
Can you speak to the staff and student device refresh? One of the things we're also discussing is district-wide cell phone policy restrictions, which students wouldn't have access to the phones, and currently in the classrooms they're often used for curriculum. Will this refresh cycle allow us to provide students like 3rd through 12th grade with a one-to-one device?
So great question. Thank you for it. The refresh is for the replacement one-to-one of grades 3 through 12, and then we are 2-to-1 K to 2. So it is a complete refresh. Currently, that's 42,305 students. That's the number we're focused on. There will be a purchase of more than that. There's a benchmark, if you will, and you may have heard this number. It's 3 to 5% loss, damage, theft rate, and we have to buy in advance. We're not buying 8 years in advance, but we're going to buy annually in advance, knowing that we're going to have that 3 to 5%. We have been, over the last 6 years, averaging over 5%. So we need to fix that. We need to putting processes and guidelines in place that will help our teachers. We're going to be partnering more with our schools to provide that in-house protection. We have been buying more carts for students that don't want to take devices home. We've been doing that in middle schools. We're partnering more with the Office of Teaching and Learning. Since we don't have a homework policy, is there a need for the device to go home? The more that the device stays in the cart, the safer it will be. And if it needs to go home, there's certainly a process to check that device out, but we will need help from our schools and from our parents to make sure that we're protecting and keeping our devices safe. So to answer the question, it's yes, we will have that cell phone policy. That's a different conversation.
And then in the materials, it said that currently they've been replaced on a five-year sort of life cycle, which is beyond ideal. Does this assume a shorter life cycle or the same 5-year life cycle?
Great question. It's an ongoing, and I think we'll have a hybrid approach. Staff, I think it's a 5-year refresh. Flip-flop. Staff, it's a 4-year refresh. For students and schools where we have carts, I think we can go a little longer. The device will be safer, it'll last longer if it's in a cart. So we could potentially get 5 years. So it'll be a hybrid for us of 4 and 5 years. Church advice.
Thank you. I have a question about the HVAC and energy sustainability, the 10 million line item. Is that just for controls? Is it for controls? Automated
systems. We don't have them in many of our schools. So in the new Benson, Jefferson, soon to be Lincoln, and the new facilities, they already have it. So the spec is when we're doing the Office of School Modernization, modernizing buildings. Our closets don't have these, our data closets. So to protect the investment of putting in network switches and routers, this is what's required. If we don't have it, there's degradation of this equipment the minute that we put it in because our temperatures get well above triple digits.
I was curious also then if it were controls and it was to increase the energy efficiency, if there was some way to get matching funds from the city's Portland Clean Energy Funds. If for instance, a control were put in place to reduce the energy demand for energy in the building, if that could be supplemented by Clean Energy Fund.
Could look into
Just
it.
a question.
Absolutely could look into it.
Great. I'll just for a moment, I may be the only board member that cares about an ERP, but it's a really important thing you're moving forward on. And one of those, as you mentioned, sort of a bedrock of any large organization. As you know, I don't need to tell you, they're also extremely high risk with more than 50% failure in the public sector of ERP projects. I won't be here to receive the reports. I would encourage the superintendent to provide the board with quarterly status updates. I'm sure you've got, quality assurance contractors and others, so I don't even think it necessarily needs to be presentations, but just making sure the board is regularly receiving status updates on where that project is can just make sure that that executive level support, that's one of the biggest reasons for failure, is when you lose that executive level support or you have some sort of transition. And so I would just encourage you all to do that, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will.
Let's move on to curriculum.
And that allows us to fully transition.
Yes, fully transition to the new ARP system. Yes.
All right, good evening. Moving on to curriculum, the proposal that you have in front of you tonight is for $56 million for curriculum. This is for $7 million over 8 years in support of curriculum adoptions. Really, there are 4 key points to make here, emphasizing the $7 million a year, emphasizing a new schedule that stretches out core adoptions in Part 1 and Part 2. So rather than approaching an adoption as a K-12 adoption with this level of funding, we would stretch it over 2 years. And so it's a unique approach allowable within ODE's cycle and adoptions. Am I loud enough? Okay, great, thank you. And so what it does is it takes the postponement that is allowable 2 years after each scheduled curriculum content. And it says, we're naming that will be within the allowable 6-year range of an adoption cycle, and then using those 2 years of a postponement, which we need to name that with ODE every time we do that, but it does keep us in compliance. And so again, what that stretching out does is takes a K-5 in 1 year, a 6-12 in another year. And this funding level is not intending for bond funds to be the sole funding source. It gives a really strong foundation for the curriculum work, and it would require some immediate reductions and also allow for us to maintain compliance with ODE's curriculum cycle as it's outlined. So those are the high points.
Questions on curriculum?
So I submitted some, well, first of all, I'm going to also say the first number we had, I think last spring, was something like 300 million. So good job also of scoping down, like, what is it that we need to do? I asked a series of questions, and I appreciate the answers that were provided over the last couple of days, and board members should have those in your inbox. I'm curious, I have some couple questions just about the curriculum. We have probably more DLI, dual language immersion programs, than I think any other district in the state, or at least the diversity of the languages offered. And it looks like when I asked what, because it noted that we had some pretty significant translation costs, that, am I reading the answer correctly, that the run rate for the cost of curricular adoption adds 30% onto our overall adoption costs?
It has historically. So when we adopt curriculum, it's common for materials to include a translation to Spanish. It is very uncommon for materials that are provided to include a translation to Chinese, Japanese, Russian, and Vietnamese, which are DLI programs. And so those costs have been very significant. Our teams are working really hard on strategizing and looking at ways to bring that down. That is a unique cost for us currently.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
For the number of, on a per student basis, to have it be up to 30%. And then the other question I had, and there was the bond audit that we got for the 2022 year, had just I think the initial review of the 2020 bond curriculum investments. And I'm wondering if there's any learnings from that, because we actually in 2020, for the first time ever, because it hadn't been allowed before, we're allowed to use bond funds for curriculum, and so we put a lot of more money than we've ever spent in 30 years, put 53 million in, and then it ended up being about another 20 million. And a question I have, and we're having our bond meeting or the audit meeting on the 16th, but whether we have looked at other districts, like to comply, every other district in the state has to, or should be trying to comply with the curriculum adoption schedule the state has, and lots of districts don't have local options or bonds. And so how do we compare? Other districts actually just like, we're not going to comply, and we're just out of Division 22 out of compliance, or are they complying and they have a more cost-effective way to do it? And I don't know if we've done that. I haven't seen us do that research, but I would.
Yeah, we have a memo linked with some comparisons and things, so I can make sure that you have access to that. So just to talk to a couple of really high points, my time in PBS is pretty short, having been on the Curriculum and Instruction Advisory Committee for Multnomah County for about a decade. Really, this is something all districts struggle with, right? So it lands within the budgeting process. So whether a district opts to do that within the general fund, oftentimes there's an approach of creating a special revenue fund where if there should be an ending fund balance, money is tucked away in that over time. That's a pretty standard approach. There are a few districts in the state that do run a bond that does support buildings and curriculum. That really is very few districts, as we've heard from Dr. Armstrong over time. This is a problem all districts are faced with, right? So it's a matter of the budgeting process. I think you had some other questions in there as well. How do districts accomplish this? They start with a per pupil dollar amount or an allocation. What we're doing uniquely so is we're budgeting out many, many years, right? Into that bigger number, it was many, many years. But what my team and I do is look at least over this last short while, is we look at the actual enrollment per that grade. We look at the projected costs. So a text in and of itself, they run at least 150. It depends on the content area. Many vendors, this is a big money piece. So our vendors also are charging digital costs and text costs. Sometimes they won't do a text cost in isolation. That question has come up as well. Could we only do text costs? So I think to answer your question, I think we all are faced with the same dilemma. How do we provide a per pupil dollar amount that also really brings in our teacher voice when we're selecting materials for the materials that they really see fit for our students. There also are costs for teacher additions. Those are quite expensive as well. And so when we enter into an adoption, we're looking at, sure, what's a reasonable rate, and then all these other pieces do come into play, as you've asked some questions about tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the digital versus the textbooks, because my kids were in school, and my entire time on the board, up until I think last year, we've never been in compliance on current adoptions until now, which is great. I mean, it's good for our students. We know that having high quality curriculum materials is great. But I also look at, this is sort of a similar question that the superintendent's asking about the high schools. Like, are we doing it in the most, are we getting what we need for the most cost-effective way? And it just, again, it seems like a lot of money then that ODE is actually requiring districts to spend with their adoption cycles, that they don't necessarily then provide the resources for districts to do that. But I think I would want to see, and I'm not seeing in the Q&A, I'm not seeing an answer, a link to the comparisons, but I can get that after the meeting. But I would like to just benchmark against, say, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Salem, just, are we within range? And again, are we comparable? Because if they're not complying and we are, then it's not a surprise that we're spending more money. But
yeah, I think we can get that answer. I think just to wrap up is I appreciate you, Director Brim Edwards, highlighting the reduction from both curriculum and technology. It's not that the need has just been, miraculously reduced, but it's the commitment from the leadership team to say that every opportunity we have to put money into our buildings, into our facilities, we're going to take. And so over the 8 years, we are going to have to think creatively about how we make up the difference for both curriculum and technology while also still moving on some of our goals for facilities. But I think we can respond later to the other questions.
We have a question. You said the bond isn't the sole funding source. Is the other one just the general fund?
Yes.
That's all? Okay.
Yes.
Nothing else? Okay. Because it just seems like curriculum and technology should be part of the everyday, but I guess the state doesn't want
Well,
to
it
see it that
absolutely
way.
should be. I appreciate the question because the way in which the materials that we need to educate our students shouldn't be a taxpayer's burden. It should be something that we handle as a school district, but we also know in this time that we're in with competing resources and needs, it's going to take us a little bit of time to be able to build up that reserve fund that Tobin mentioned. Sorry, I just want to call her by her first name. But, that Joanna mentioned. But yes, the goal is to be able to handle general fund or to apply general fund dollars to our curriculum needs. But in the state of Oregon, we are obviously allowed to use bond dollars for technology and curriculum. So we're able to utilize that and resource our district in ways that we wouldn't be able to in any other way.
Great. Curriculum, modernizations?
Can I just ask one last, it wasn't clear, we got a sample of here's where we're proposing to spend the funds, and there was some funding for electives. And then when I asked the question, does ODE require curriculum adoptions for electives, the answer was ODE requires curriculum adoptions for the content areas stated in the curriculum adoption cycle. So do they include, I don't recall seeing electives.
So, quickly, it just depends on how we define electives. No. No is the quick answer.
I would say state graduation requirements are, if they're not in the state graduation requirements, those would be electives.
Right. So the areas that are included in the adoption cycle that would be often considered electives would be world language, visual and performing arts, and physical education. We usually consider that core now. Those areas do not have the same, it depends on how we approach it. What are our values? What are our beliefs? What do we want to enter into? They typically do not have a text. And sometimes there are some open source, example of PE, there's some open source materials. Our bond allows for durable items to be purchased. Sometimes our items are consumable if they're not intended to last beyond, say 5 years. So there's some complexities there.
Yeah, so all of those things, PE, world languages, and arts are all in graduation requirements. Yeah.
So we need to move on. So yeah, let's go on to the modernizations. Thanks.
Let's my friends up here go back to their seats, and I want to invite Stormy Shanks, who's the Senior Director of Office of Polarization, to join me to help answer questions. If I can, I want to take just a minute to do some context about, I threw this slide in here at the last minute. Just to provide some context around modernizations, how designs and cost estimates, how they're developed. And I think this will help some of the conversation about when we talk about, reimagining the high schools. And so hopefully this is somewhat linear and makes sense. But this is very quickly and high level. Our modernization projects, ostensibly are high schools, but not just our high schools, things like Kellogg and Fabian. Some of their design decisions started a decade ago with these guiding documents. So district has adopted guiding documents over a long period of time, the education specifications being primary, but there are others as well as we have design standards, we have district policy, all those sort of things which are the guiding documents that we call them, and those inform the design before there is even a design. So then we move into our first phase of pre-design, but comprehensive planning. And I think most of the board is familiar with comprehensive planning. All of our high schools go through this process. Usually takes about 6 months. And it's the first time that the guidance documents, along with the existing conditions of the site, as well as input from stakeholders, staff, students, community partners, etc., that becomes a site-specific design, high level, and that is the first time we get an initial project estimate from a third-party professional construction cost estimator. So that is when the budgets for the project are first set. Prior to that, they're very parametric. It's dollars per square foot times an assumed square foot, like that sort of thing. So the comprehensive plan is the first time that we get that third-party cost estimate. The comprehensive plans are, of course, approved by the board, which really establish the scope, the schedule, and budget for those projects. Then they move on into the formal design phases. The formal design has 3 primary phases: schematic design, design development, and then contract documents. We get updated cost estimates from those third-party cost estimators at each one of those phases. So the point being, I guess, that as the designs progress, we get updated cost estimates from professional cost estimators, and that's what informs our budgets and what our designs are. So hopefully that's helpful, and we note that the community and stakeholder engagement is involved all along that timeline. So hopefully that provides some context. Happy to answer questions. I'll go back to our originally scheduled topic. For our modernizations, I'll jump around notes because we've talked about a little bit of this already. The teams, the 3 modernization high school teams have been tasked with kind of reimagining the projects to align with the target budgets noted here. Since those project costs are based on the latest designs and the designs are based on district standards shaped by that stakeholder feedback, it will be important that we revisit these and consider these previous decisions through this effort. And this will be a process. So the design teams are developing concepts and action plans right as we speak. And it's early, but I anticipate we'll go through the iterative steps that I mentioned before, developing initial cost-saving options. So really high level, what are these potential options? What might they look like? Gaining feedback from stakeholders on those options, designing, and then cost estimating, get that third-party independent cost estimate of what those redesigns look like, presenting to the board or the committee, whatever that process might be, and ultimately approval to proceed. As shown, so that's how we see this process going that we talked about earlier. As shown or talked about before, the savings could go to modernizing middle schools and elementary schools. And the idea of modernizing these schools after high schools are completed has been discussed conceptually for a long time, but not with a lot of detail. Specific schools and scopes have not been determined, and many of the decisions that need to be made prior to proceeding with the middle school or elementary school include selection criteria, identifying the criteria for which future schools would be selected for modernization, and that criteria could include a number of things, including school type, facility condition, educational program needs, availability of temporary housing, enrollment location, demographics, costs, etc. So there's probably going to be a lot of potential criteria that would then, once those are established, point to which school or schools will be modernized. And then, as Director Byrne-Roberts brought up, what is that scope of work? We use the word modernization pretty loosely, but generally means our high schools, we're going to build new construction or we're going to really fully renovate them to an almost essentially new standard. That is not, it can be what happens with future modernizations of other schools, but it can also be something else. It can also be more targeted at investing in those critical facility improvements or other scopes of work or something in between those. So those are decisions that would need to be made before we moved on. And then of course, maybe most importantly is like, what is that decision-making process? These are big decisions. What's the process that results in those decisions? Those decisions, of course, being made, and considering the amount of work that we have based on the 2020 authorization and what is contemplated here in the 2025 authorization, work on those modernizations is probably quite a bit out. So I think we have time to design those processes, make those decisions, have that feedback and that iterative process.
And then just to add to that is we also, to your point, need to hear what the final costs would be for both Ida B. Wells and Cleveland before even naming elementary and middle schools, because while we are hoping for 470 once we get the final cost, it could be significantly less. So that's one of the reasons why we're not yet at a place of wanting to name specific sites when we still have 2 high schools that are being costed out.
I have a question just about the terminology. So a modernization in my mind is a full modernization, gut and rebuild or knock down and rebuild. But a tenant improvement, how would we characterize Harrison Park? Would that be a tenant improvement project? Or
that's a great question. We have called that a mini modernization, for lack of a better, because it's not the full, but it's a lot of scope that has gone into that with new mechanical systems, roofing systems, obviously a lot of programmatic changes as well. So that's that in between.
Okay, so are all the divisions being addressed in a modernization and only some in a mini modernization, like site work?
Yeah, I think that's a fair, where we are now, I think that's kind of a fair way to categorize it. Whereas a full modernization means we're basically doing everything. And then if we're doing something less, where we're not touching all scopes of work, maybe we'd call that a mini. We are amenable to time
know what
changes.
we're talking about, at least for me. I mean, I think I understand the difference, but
There's
Of what, at least in our community conversations, what modernization means, and I think you described it as like the knockdown rebuild, or
yes,
like a full on.
Or it could be the division, concrete, site work, plumbing, mechanical, drywall, every single division of work versus just some. Harrison Park probably wasn't full.
Correct.
So
I really like I like what you've done here. I said that at the beginning, but I want to reiterate it. One of the things, Dan, and I think again, it's I mean, to be really blunt, we could go to the voters with a bond that has $1.15 billion for the remaining 3 high schools, and I think what we're doing here is saying we might need that money for the remaining 3 high schools, but we hope we can do the remaining 3 high schools and a number of other projects. And I actually think that's a really positive step forward. I think it's a much better bond as a result of that, and allowing for that flexibility. I think when we talk about criteria, I absolutely don't think we should be naming schools, because that's just setting expectations without adequate knowledge. I do think figuring out and talking and being able to talk about what the criteria might be, and whether it's referring back to our facility condition assessments or other criteria that you currently use to prioritize projects, and being really clear with the community that to the extent that money's not needed for the 3 high schools, to the extent we can spend that money on available, on elementary and middle schools, this is the process that the district would go through. These are the types of criteria we would look at sort of that broad way. And then also building in some accountability that probably comes back to the board, maybe with our bond audit committee, et cetera, or with community involvement as well, because it is years out, right? If this board refers this package and the voters approve it, we're not coming back, to spend this money on those elementary and middle schools for 2 years, right? And so there's time not just to work out the specifics, but also to do a lot of that community engagement. I think that's where it could be a real selling point that this is not a black box, but we also can't define it. I mean, honestly, a little bit like the Center for Black Student Excellence, right? I mean, it's a process that's still ongoing, but we're doing co-creation with the community around it to figure out what we need to do. And I could see a similar vision for these potential dollars if they do come to fruition. So, okay, questions on modernizations.
So, one just fundamental question I would have is, if we had 470 million and we're not going to, or even 400 million, and we're not going to use it for years to come, wouldn't one possibility be we shorten the bond and save money on interest, and then when we go out for the next bond after we've done all the community planning? I don't know that we've done, and again, depends on what your definition of modernization, but we've never done modernizations where there's not a whole host of process before the bond referral. I mean, all the schools, every school that we've modernized has been specifically named in the bond. And so just the question is, if we had that money and we're not going to do that for years later, it seems like from a taxpayer's standpoint and just the community standpoint is like, well, then why don't you put that in the next bond? And
So I'd like to answer that one first.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we're still, I mean, it would be unfortunate to give that back when we're still in the process of costing out Ida B. Wells in Cleveland until that design is complete. Like, I know it's our expectation, team's expectation, my expectation is that it's one bond per building, that we're not, having some amount and then because we didn't ask for enough, we got to now wait for another bond to be able to finish off Cleveland or Ida B. Wells.
$470 million is a lot to have in flux. So I'll go to like another issue that, just a question I have. So going through the materials. So from the very start of this last spring, I strongly support finishing the modernizations of our high schools. We made that commitment to the community. We're going to do it. And this bond has the ability to complete the high schools. The proposed cuts for me need a lot more clarity before we have the referral. And one of the set of questions that I asked, it said that we might not get the data back till after the referral, and I just think that's not the responsible. I mean, for me, we should have that before we do the referral. And again, having a process in which we refer, and then we're going to come back and say what's in the project and what's out, and how much it's going to cost, is not the sequential process we've used in the past. And I think it makes it harder, frankly, to sell to the voters, because there's confusion then about what is it that we're asking them to fund. Are we asking them to fund a full ed spec with everything we did for Grant and Lincoln and McDaniels? Or are we asking them for a smaller project? And how do they feel about that? And I feel like we have to have that before we refer. And so in the documents it said that would be probably done by the end of January. So I know nobody wants to wait to the end of January, but to me, like, that is like an essential component that we're actually know what we're asking the voters to approve, because it's a lot of money.
So I'm curious about that, and maybe Dan has a question, but I think our belief is that it's ed specs built to 1,700 and all the things that were previously listed. So I'm not sure about the reduction.
So the target reduction, the question I would have is, and then I can't
what's the reduction? Are you talking about the dollar amount?
For the high school modernizations, my understanding, and I'm trying to look at 3 different documents, and I can't link the link to the ed specs doesn't work. But if you, in the answers to questions, it says we'll know what those reductions or what the reductions in the target, what they look like. Like, where do we get those from by the end of January? Isn't that what the?
Well, we're hoping, because the teams are just starting to look at this process. So we're hoping to get some initial feedback by the end of January. But we're not going to have time to get community engagement and then to be able to do redesign, get third-party cost estimating by the end of January.
I think, just my personal opinion, having passed for 25 years of passing bonds and local options, it's challenging to put the largest bond in state history on the ballot with we don't yet know what the project looks like. And the expectation usually is that for all the Cleveland and Ida B. Wells people here, is usually those communities provide most of the volunteers, a lot of the financial support. And if we don't know what the project looks like, I think that is really challenging to run a successful ballot campaign and to get support. I mean, if we're going to get all the ed specs and everything, it's like I didn't hear you say, even when I asked about the athletics. So if it's like we're going to get smaller science classrooms, or not as much square footage in the counseling offices, or we're going to have 100% utilization, and we find that out after we refer, because that's how we get the cost, versus, like, I'm with Director Green here, if, like, we can make the, the contractors, you know, a better process where we get a more competitive price or something, that's great. But if it's, we're actually reducing or changing or limiting the ed specs, which just sounds like those
no one
could
has
be
suggested
negotiated.
that, right?
No,
No one,
that's,
except for you, right?
no, that's not, okay. So
Well, I mean,
My
I have not heard that.
expectation is that we're going to have 3 schools built over the next 4 years that are at ed specs, built for $1,700, and that will have all the bells and whistles that all the other schools, if not
The memo
actually
says
more.
that.
Yeah, with some of the things we're doing with fields that we didn't do with the prior projects.
when I asked over the weekend, I didn't get a direct answer. Like, if we're doing all the ed specs and that's not changing, then that should be clearly communicated. But even when I ask about the fields, it was, well, maybe there's a community process where the community decides that's a lesser priority than more CTE, adequate CTE space. I mean, Roosevelt's a great example of, like, not adequate CTE, like, it got value engineered some ed specs, and that's why then we set a new set of standards after the 2012 bond where Franklin and Roosevelt got some stuff valued engineered out, is that we set new standards, and as long as the commitment from the superintendent is that, and again, I asked this weekend and I didn't get that, I wasn't sure what the answer is, and so I'm just looking for clarity.
No, I appreciate that. I could definitely say that ed specs is our guiding document, but with the, like the DAG group, if, I think we talked earlier about like a health facility being in the plans, and if the design group has made some other proposals and that recommendation was accepted through the design process and they wanted to go a whole different direction, I mean, you know, that's an ed specs, but, you know, are we required to have it, or do we lean on the design group to elevate some of those things?
Well, the ed specs were set up so that we have equitable high schools across the district, and if we changed them or we said they're going to be different, I think there's equity issues, because, for example, historically said, like, hey, the kids in that part of town, they're all going to college, so they don't need CTE, so we're going to, like, dial up the CTE at these schools, but not the other ones. And with the ed specs, we tried to say, no matter what high school you're at, you're going to have similar academic spaces, library space, counseling space, health clinics, so that it, no matter what high school you're at, you would have access to that. And so it wasn't like the design advisory group could say, hey, we decided to build the high school for, you know, 2,200 versus 1,700, or we're going to build it for 1,400.
Right. So, Steph, do you have? I mean, is there anything else you want to say around that? To answer Director Romano's question.
I'll just note that the ed specs, two things maybe. One, all the schools exceed ed specs to date in some areas and then don't meet in other areas, largely because of existing conditions. The ed specs also are a range where there's required and there's preferred. And so one of the things we're asking the team to do is more focus on the required than the preferred. And are there things that where we're above the standard or we're above the specification, or even where we're above code requirements? Are those things that we can take a look at and find some cost reductions?
Director Promoters, I want to ask, it seemed like you said you wanted to finish the high schools, and it seemed like in prior meetings you were comfortable referring a bond that had $450 or $460 million per high school. So I'm struggling a little to understand why a bond package that still has funding for all of those things, but also talks about a process we're going to go through that could create more room for additional projects is a negative.
I started with a statement so that people would understand, because there has been a discussion of, like, should we put all the money into the high schools? So I want to just lay out, I'm supportive of having all the high schools in, because if we go back to the initial conversation, there wasn't necessarily agreement that we were going to put all the high schools in. So I'm just starting with that assumption. And I'm for, since I'm a taxpayer, and have been one for a long time on PPS, that we have the most cost-effective schools. I also believe that we should be clear with the community about what it is that we're buying. Because what I don't think what you want to have happen is, yeah, the campaign said that, but really the district is doing this. And so this is like getting the, like, what exactly is it that we're doing so that people understand what's in or out. So Dan, having the ed specs of which are the required ones, I think super helpful to the community. Like, you're going to get this because everybody's required. Here's where, like, if you want a performing arts theater that's slightly smaller because you want to go long on something else, that's preferred. That's also good to know. But I think the more clarity we can provide the school communities before the referral and before we ask people to vote, the more successful we will be and the better we will be in terms of the district with credibility with our broader community.
Yeah, and I think it adds a lot of credibility to the process that we're going through right now. The other thing I guess I want to point out, I know folks are waiting for the contract who's doing their comparison of high school costs. What was the name?
Cornerstone Management.
Cornerstone Management. And I guess I don't think people should expect too much from that. I think it's going to be very helpful. It's not going to decide, right, whether we can find, $100 million from these projects or not. It's going to give us some directions, to look at. But I'm going to come back to the overall. I mean, I think we as a district have a responsibility to move this forward. This is, been a very, very slow process. Just as a reminder, we were planning to refer this bond in November. We decided not to for a variety of reasons, but we've been talking about for a very long time. And actually, the overall package hasn't changed that much. It has changed based on feedback from board members, based on feedback from the public as we settled in. But for quite a while now, we've had these same criteria from previous meetings from the board around 1.5 to 1.8 billion, an 8-year amount, finishing the high schools, adding the other things that we can. I think continued delay puts Cleveland and Wells at risk. And to be really blunt, we need to be referring this. We should have referred it in December. I don't see any reason why we haven't been able to, but I think as we continue to move forward, we need to refer it as quickly as we can so we can get a campaign up and running and get this done in May. I think the longer we wait, the more we risk missing May or potentially not being able to mount a strong campaign if we do it too late. If we miss May and go to November, it's actually going to cost the district tens of millions of dollars as we delay Wells and Cleveland projects and have to wait for that bond. So there's a very strong package here, and I'm going to continue to push back on what I see as a really blatant mischaracterization of a reduction in funding for these high schools. And I don't know if that mischaracterization is coming from certain board members. I don't know if it's coming from the public, but this package says we're going to spend the exact same amount on modernizations as we were going to spend last week and the week before. What we are also going to do is scrub these numbers and spend dollars in a way that I think taxpayers will reward us for. Honestly, if we referred to $450 million high school projects, that in and of itself could have potentially put the bond in danger, because I think people would have rightfully asked, what are you spending all that money on? And so this moves us in a really positive direction around accountability, transparency, efficiency around the project. And I'm concerned about this continued delay on
I would just say,
details that I know. I'm not quite done yet.
Go ahead.
So I'm concerned about a continued delay around this and the possibility that it's going to put it all at risk. I do want to open this up to other board members.
Okay, I would like to say
we're going to come
something.
back to you, Director Bremedwitz. You've said a lot tonight, so we're going to come back to you.
I'm on the committee.
Director Bremedwitz, we're going to come back to you. I'm chair right now. I'm going to see if anybody else has any other comments. You're going to have a moment to speak, but you need to wait. Do any other board members have questions about the package or comments overall? I do want to wrap us up here as we're already about half an hour over. So I'm really interested in specific questions you have about the package, and then also if there's anything you would want to change moving forward, or any questions staff can answer offline moving forward. Director Wong, what's down there?
Yeah, I was going to make this comment a long time ago. I missed the boat. I just want to remind everyone that our work doesn't finish when we refer this bond. Our work continues. Our job as a board, as publicly elected representatives, is to oversee the use of this budget. So, or use of this bond. It hasn't even passed yet, so let's also be clear about that. We don't have this money yet. We need to do everything to make this successful. One really quick question. I mean, I want to reiterate, to be absolutely clear, I mean, 360 million would put these schools as the most expensive schools in our district, correct? Right. And it has room to, if there's need, right, where the bond is allocating $1.15 billion. So if it needs to go above, there's that option. But the goal is to try to get the same school for less money so that we have more money for others. I mean, just kind of give you some perspective, right? Like Kellogg was done for $40 million, right? And we're talking about like to redo HVAC systems in elementary or middle schools somewhere around 10 to 20 million. So I mean, if we can save $100 million, that's 5 schools that get new HVAC systems, right? One thing I would be nice to see it from an accountability standpoint, because it is our job to kind of oversee this project, make sure the money is used well, and it may also help with the campaign. And I know we're waiting on this report, and there's been a lot of work done in the district, but to maybe give examples of some priorities, right? Like as we identify it, say like, you know, we do have like these elementary schools or these middle schools that are a priority we want to get to within 2 years. It would be nice to have that identified, and obviously with some flexibility, because you know that I think that part is important for accountability, but that also a reminder that's an ongoing process. That's something that we do throughout our whole term here and after May. So, thank you.
Well, I just think it looks fantastic if you can get the same ed specs and save some money. I don't know what the argument is. So I've been really fighting for the athletic hubs. I think we're doing that. I think we're doing as much as we can in lots of different areas. And kind of have to leave some of the planning to the experts there. I'm not going to plan the schools. So anyway, thank you for the work you've done.
Student Representative Consenti.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm strongly in support of the direction we're moving in. I just want to thank the superintendent for really directing staff into this vision. I think, you know, we've heard it clearly from our students. Athletics is definitely a big priority, so I hope that's something we really prioritize in this bond.
Thank you. So I wanna make sure that I get these out when we start thinking about modernization. And I know we had asked about the audit. We were told that we were going to get the audit in the first part of November. Then it was moved to the last part of November, and now we're being told that it's going to take more time. So I'd like to get if we can figure out how we're going to wrap that up, because we're continuing to move forward on the idea of let's get this construction done without having the construction audit. And I'm concerned that in PPS, delay means denial. And I think that's the concern from some of the community and other people, which is why we're pushing we want to make sure that we name Cleveland, that we name Ida B. Wells, that we name these specific things, is because our history has shown, and I'm a part of this now, and I'm on it, so I have to eat it, I have to bear it, I have to wear that weight, that when we put stuff off, it's because we'll just push it down, and eventually they'll forget about it and we'll move on to the next thing. So I'd like to, if we can put a button on when this audit is going to come back, because it doesn't even make sense to me that we can continue to move forward with the same practice in which we're doing things if the audit is supposed to be looking at the whole process and determining whether or not are we using best practice or not. So with that, I'd like to know, is the audit going to identify, because we got all these people that are working and doing different things, will the audit identify the number of people that we have that are being paid by bond dollars? Is there a number? Is it 5 people, 6 people, 7? Like, how many people are being, how many staff members are being paid by the bond? And so I'd like to know if the audit is going to cover that. Will the audit identify the number of change orders over the last 3 projects that was done, the number of change orders that might have came in to increase the scope of costs, change the scope of costs, and what was that looking like, and what was the dollar amount of those change orders? Because I think that, again, when we're doing an audit to try to get an understanding of how things are going, I think understanding where the change orders are coming from and the process in which that's happening might also let us know what it is we could do differently to be more transparent. And then will the audit cover the scopes? Like, because I understand that one of the things that we were talking about with Jefferson was that we wanted to be a completely climate neutral or something like that. Whatever the terminology we were using. Yeah, I don't understand it. I drive a big truck and I burn a lot of smoke. And so, but I understand we're trying to get there. And so we were saying we want Jefferson to be the first school that was 100%. I think it was like, is that what caused it? And if so, clean energy, yeah, net zero, that's what it is. So what does will it identify these things? And then the last thing that the last thing that I want to say is that, and I'm done. I put it all down so that when I get to this last point, I have to stop talking for the night. And it's my daughter's birthday, and I'm gonna leave y'all whether y'all get finished or not to go to her birthday party up at Red Robin. So it's about to be tough. But the last thing that I'm going to state is that I want to come back to this whole idea of just power forward. I believe that we can get every one of our schools done. I believe that we can get every one of our high schools. Let me say that. I believe that we can get every one of our high schools done with the money that we currently have in the bond. I also believe that we could possibly, even if we got very aggressive, and I believe in being aggressive, that we could use some of that funding to say that we're going to come back and we're going to make sure that we address all the HVAC systems in every one of our elementary schools and middle schools with the remaining funding. The reasons I feel like this is important is because there was a drum beat during the teacher strike that we've stopped talking about, and that the drum that everybody was beating, besides the other stuff, was that we want our facilities, we want our schools to be free of rats, mold, and they had a whole anthem that they were beating the drum about rats, mold, cold, and I'm looking at how with what we're doing, keeping the number where it's at, addressing some of the issues that address those things, the rats that are in our schools. Let's stop saying that we don't have them. They're in there. The mold that's in the school, and the heat during the summer, and air during the heat during the winter, air during the summer. So all of those things, I've now said everything that I've got on my list. We got about 10 minutes.
Are you sure? Okay. I'm really glad, I guess, that we are talking about promise to taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer too, and that we're actually trying to find opportunities to build excellent buildings for not for $500,000. I was really shocked to hear that we might have a high school that would be the most expensive high school in the country. I'm really curious to get this report from the Cornerstone Group to find out. I'm trying to temper my expectations, but I'm really curious about why we are so expensive here in Portland to build. I'm looking for that nugget because I don't understand. And I've worked in construction and other public agencies, and our costs are just out of the water. I'm really happy with the package as it is. I think it would be wise to provide for that $470 million, those potential, some idea of how we would prioritize, because we have so much more demand for facilities improvements than we have dollars. But yeah, I'm happy. I'm confident that with this package we get the final three high schools built, and I want to see that through.
A couple things just around the audit piece. When we're talking about potential savings piece and what the audit can bring to us, I know we had talked about it at the last board meeting when we were directing the superintendent about the audit. As far as the CMGC piece, is it a potential cost savings if they're separated or not separated? I don't know if the audit's going to talk about that, but I know that's one of the things that we director superintendent to look at. And then I just want to just put it out here. Like, I wonder, do we really have enough time and information to make the data-driven decisions by the May election, right? And I'm hearing all these pulling different, perspectives. And it seems like some folks are waiting on information. Some folks feel that we should just go ahead. I just don't want to go ahead just for the sake of going ahead if it's not going to benefit our kids, period. If it's going to benefit our kids to move forward, then damn it, let's move forward. If we need to pause to really look at the overall landscape and see, we already know that 3 high schools are going to get done. I don't think that's a question anymore. I know we talked about athletics. I don't think that should be a question anymore since we already talked about athletics. So that shouldn't be a question anymore. But it seems like there's some questions about some other things. And I just want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture before we make sure that we're going to do right by our kids. What we don't want to do is, we would have, could have, should have, because we was rushing, or it seemed like we was in urgency. And I do believe it should be urgent, but not too urgent where it affects our kids. And so I think I just stop there. Yeah, I can ask what you're doing. Once again, we need to ask for more. We had $2.2 billion. If you look at the slides, it doesn't change the tax rate, so no one pays any more taxes. It doesn't change the bond rate as far as, when we can go out for another bond. It adds $400 million to a $560 million that we need for the next 8 years. So I'm gonna just put that out there. Like I think the voters would absolutely approve a $2.2 billion bond to make sure that we are keeping up with the deferred maintenance that we need of almost $992 million of deferred maintenance that we have right now. So I would just implore us to say, hey, let's ask for the 2.2. It doesn't cost nobody anymore. It's still at the same $250 per thousand rate. It doesn't change anything. It just adds more money to what we can do for our kids. That's it.
Director Edwards.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, when we did the polling though, it was like it's not up to us it's up to what voters are going to approve, and it was like at the 1.8.
We only polled 500 some people. That's not.
But that's a representative sample of likely voters.
Do you feel like we've had this conversation?
Yeah, we have. But I'm saying that was only 500 people.
Director Edwards.
So, I'm going to start by saying I think I'm optimistic. I think we can do the work, but we have a lot of work to do before the referral. But I think we can do it. And it's, I'll just say the delay. It's like we didn't have a meeting in November. We got the materials on Wednesday. And so this is a natural reaction of like, hey, there's some new ideas on the table. And the community is going to want to understand it. And I think we have an obligation to build that understanding of exactly what it is that we're going to have on the bond before we ask people to do it. But I believe we just have to keep accelerating the pace, and we need to do our work in public, and so that people can see the thought process that's going into it. I mean, I want to just go back to the tech and the curriculum, that we had lots of conversations last spring, and I think some of those discussions got us to a better place. And so I'm believing that targets that the superintendent has laid out there can get us to a better place. But I also think we have to have a plan that we're referring to voters that has enough specificity that people know what they're getting for their taxes. And that's kind of our credibility and the ability to pass it with the voters. Having said that, I have sort of 4 just final additional thoughts. Some of the questions I would ask that the Q&A that we got today get posted, because I think it will answer some community questions that people have. Again, getting more information out to people, sharing out the ed specs so people understand the required versus the preferred. And then I do think, and this is both Director DePass and I mentioned this, process of how we're going to prioritize the deferred maintenance. We have no shortage of it, so it seems like we could come up with a way to prioritize it and then have that sort of caveat line item of emergencies and everything else. I would like us to consider the slightly larger athletic package, because I don't know how we answer the question about what we're going to do for these communities that aren't going to have the full. I'm getting a second. And then I also shared last spring and again before this meeting an amendment to add a Center for Native Student Success. And this came about from discussions with board members before we were passing the Albina Vision Trust. And when we were acknowledging that land from Albina was taken from the Black community, that also originally land for the school district was taken from the Native community, that the Native community response was, you know, it'd be nice to have something more than land acknowledgements as our engagement with the district. So again, that's been posted. I hope that will be considered by the board. And also I know that we've had letters of support last spring, and also more recently from our Native staff and students and community members. And then the last item is, if there is savings, or I don't know what we want to call it, but that 470, whatever that number is, again, I think we should have a process of how we prioritize it. And I'm really with Director. Don't leave, because I'm about ready to agree with you.
I'm not leaving just yet.
That we should identify like major systems that we're going to target. And I think the HVAC system, I'm very much in agreement with that, because it's the heat and the cold. And students are losing instructional time. We know that. And we couldn't run summer school. I mean, there's a whole host of things. So I think targeting something for that everybody in the community would know that, hey, my school's going to be able to operate all year round and not have to close down when it's too hot in the summer or ice storm. So really thinking about how we share with the community, like, we hear this is a priority and we're going to make investments in it, versus, I mean, I'm concerned about right now doing something like, we're going to pick 2 middle schools to modernize, and everybody else is going to have hot or cold schools for another 10 years. So I would think, I know in the, like, for example, in the 2012 bond, we told like all the middle schools are going to get new science labs. And it really helped with our I mean, it was focused on our curriculum and academics, and every middle school got something. It wasn't like, hey, you have to wait your turn in 20 years until you get modernized to get the right science lab. So I'm with, and that's all, but we're going to have to accelerate the pace, but I think we can do it. I think we can do it.
Okay, thanks for those comments. From a process, I'm going to have a couple other things to say, but from a process perspective, we do have time on tomorrow's board meeting, but to talk about this, but I don't know if we're going to need to take it, Director Wong, Chair Wong, because the whole board was here tonight. So if you want to, we can continue the conversation. But in the board work session 2 weeks from now, we are going to be talking about the bond overall. So again, this package, you know, some of the feedback that folks have had is going to come forward for additional conversation in 2 weeks. And you know, I'm happy to loop back with leadership in terms of the overall timing. I said it before, but I think what I'm concerned about is this. One, it's been a very lengthy process. You know, we have been moving quickly, but not that quickly. And we can certainly extend it out. I think most of the questions tonight, they're really good questions from all board members. They're really good questions. But they're really good questions about general school board governance and general school district governance. And I feel like what we're doing is we're taking this, you know, because we're passing a bond, everyone feels like, oh my gosh, we have to understand how are we prioritizing all of our projects? How are we auditing these things? How are we doing back to these? Those are questions we can ask at any single time about any of the bonds that are on the table. Delaying the referral of a bond that has already been delayed and is already putting those high schools at risk in order to ask general questions that can be asked and answered at any time, I think is a huge mistake. What we need to do is put forward a credible, transparent package that the district can be held accountable for. That's the package that the superintendent and staff have put on the table. And so I think there's some real value in moving forward, and I think there's some real risk. I mean, when we talk about wanting to not do something that's going to harm our kids, I actually really think delaying this in order to get a lot of these questions that really don't have to do with the bond, they have to do with general governance answered, could potentially harm our kids. I made you say your point about the $3 billion just because I wanted to respond to it. Director Hollins and I, well, because I think it's important for a public conversation. Because Director Hollins and I actually agree on this 100%, that we both want to see $3, $4, $5 billion come in. The only thing we disagree on is where the line is between what voters will support and what they won't. And that's a subjective line. We don't know. It is very possible at $2.2 billion we could run a winning campaign. It's very possible at $3 billion we could run a winning campaign. I don't think so. I think a $1.8 billion bond is going to be really, really touch and go. In today's environment, given the polling, given the, even though this doesn't raise taxes, given the anti-tax environment, I think it's going to be a very, very hard and challenging campaign, one we can win, but I don't think it's going to be by much. I point back to things like the zoo bond, barely passed. It was for, I can't even remember, I should know this, a couple $100 million, $265 million.
You compare our kids to animals.
Do you know how much people love the animals? Do you know how much they love the animals? And it barely passed. And so and again, same thing, it was not a tax increase. My point being that it's going to be a challenging campaign. And so that's the disagreement is not about the need, right? The disagreement is just about the politics of it. And I think that's going to be one of the key things. Maybe I'll just end there. I think it's been a good meeting. We'll have time for more conversations. I do worry about things getting thrown in at the last minute that aren't well thought out. I think there's opportunity in the future. That's the very last point I wanted to make. This bond locks the district in, but I'm using that intentionally. It locks the district in for 8 years from going out for another bond at the same tax rate. What it doesn't do is lock the district in from going out for another GO bond with an increased tax rate. And that's something that we talked about, right, as a board last year, and we decided that given the politics of the polling, it would be too hard to pass. There's nothing that prevents a board a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, going out for another GO bond with a tax increase and generating additional dollars for additional projects. And I think it's an important thing as we talk about not everything's going to be in this bond, but future boards, if the political dynamic changes, can go back out again for tax increases.
So let's make sure I understand. So you're saying we shouldn't go out for more now, even though it's not going to be a tax increase, but we potentially, another board can go out for another one that will be a tax increase, and that'll probably be an easier way to pass.
Well,
it doesn't make, right, I know what you're saying. So why would we do the more now without having to try to have another board that we might not be on have the difficult time of going out to raise taxes?
No, the reason is because the polling has shown, and if you're paying attention to the political environment right now, Gary, it isn't very good for a lot of things. And I think that one of the fears is that if we lose this bond, it sets us back at least a couple of years before we go out again. So the issue is
the advantage could be if we do win, which I'm always for we going to win, and we can pass the 2.2. That's $400 million that potentially can go into deferred maintenance for the same folks who kids is just going to benefit. It's just hard for me to look in this deficit mindset that we would not do what we can for our kids when you're talking about a 2.2 versus a 1.8. I don't think, for me, and I've been a property taxer for almost 40-some years, I'm not going to say, well, you know what, it's 1.8 versus 2.2, so I'm not going to pass it. And there's no one doing this.
But you would agree there's a line somewhere, right?
Is there a line somewhere for what people do
There's
for
no
the kids?
line. Let's do $5 billion, right?
I'm just saying, is there a line for people what they do for the kids? Is there a line for what you would do for your kid outside of your means? You can do whatever you can.
PPS bonds have failed in the past, and what I
won the very first one, and we passed all the other ones since then.
I told you this is a subjective conversation.
I know, I hear you.
Either one of us knows, but here's the point: is that if I knew the $2.2 billion would pass, listen to me, then I would vote for it. But if you knew the $2.2 billion would fail, would you still vote for it?
Of course, if I knew it wouldn't.
Exactly, and that's my point. So we're both guessing.
But I don't know if 1.8 might fail too. I hope it do. But it's always a possibility.
Enjoy. Happy birthday. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
All right. I just don't think that makes too much of a difference.